Committee Room 21. Sound.
Okay, members, I would remind you to turn off your mobile phones, certainly get them on silent. And we do have quorum, clerk, so happy to continue. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we are now open in public session. Please advise those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. It is not permitted to take photographs or take a recording of any of the meeting. So, members, are there any matters of interest to declare over and above that which you've already declared or relevant to the matters under discussion today? No? Okay. Thank you. Members, agenda item 1, our apologies. I'm not aware of any apologies, but we do have a member joining us on Zoom today, which is Anya Murphy. Okay, no problem. We'll check and to make sure that we've got Anya on. I just could ask the guys to ensure that we check in with Anya in terms of any questions and stuff that she is part of the meeting, if that's okay. Members, with your agreement, we will now go straight to agenda item 5, which is the briefing from the Minister and Chief Veterinary Officer on bovine TB. Minister, I believe you have 45 minutes with us today, and we want to get the most out of it. Can I just ask, is 45 minutes a hard stop for you today?
We can do up to 11. I've got another, I have to leave here at 11:15. So.
Well, we would appreciate that, guys. So that gives us around 55 minutes, and we want to get the best use out of that, if that's okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask you to give us the brief on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and also to members of the committee for the opportunity to come here and for the opportunity to brief you on bovine tuberculosis and the recently completed review undertaken by the Chief Veterinary Officer, Brian Dooher, which I have now received. Members will also have received an embargoed copy of the report yesterday afternoon, and I look forward to discussing the key proposals within it during our session this morning. Let me put on record that I very much welcome the CVO's report and would like to express my thanks and appreciation to Brian and to all of those who engaged with him as he carried out this important assessment of our current approach to TB in Northern Ireland. This is an excellent report. It's considered and well informed and should help us all in reframing the conversation around bovine TB, its impact and how we address it. It paints a clear Northern Ireland Pacific picture of the characteristics of the disease and how it is spread. It also clearly identifies the impact of the disease on farm families, our ability to trade, on animal welfare and also on the public purse. The impact of bovine TB upon farmers and their mental health is something that weighs very heavily upon my mind. We must and we can do better in tackling this issue together. The report articulates very starkly the scale of the challenges and why it must be surmounted. But most importantly, it also sets out in detail many of the barriers to progress, with proposals as to how these could be overcome. The report clearly sets out there are 3 key pillars to any approach to eradicating TB, and that any TB strategy must be based around these, with progress made across all 3 fronts of people, culture and behaviour, secondly, cattle interventions, and thirdly, wildlife interventions. It is also clear that, in recent years, we have lost ground. While a new bovine TB eradication strategy was published in March 2022, legal challenges around wildlife and the ongoing absence of ministers slowed its implementation. The disease, however, has not been prepared to wait, and the position has continued to worsen. I think we all know that within this room. However, our understanding of science and evidence has continued to evolve, and the report provides an opportunity to reset the debate around the actions needed to counter and eradicate TB. I would encourage all stakeholders to read the review in full and not shy away from discussing and debating the proposals it contains. For too long, the debate around bovine TB has focused on the place of wildlife intervention in controlling and eradicating this disease. I am conscious, therefore, that there will be particular interest in what it says around wildlife interventions. I want to provide assurance that I will take forward further consultation on possible wildlife interventions before reaching any decision on the way forward, taking into account the findings in the CVO's report, plus other relevant information and evidence, current legislative provisions, and the outcome of the judicial review against my department's former wildlife policy. Wildlife is, however, only one of 3 key pillars which will help us achieve disease eradication, and the importance of the other 2 should not be underestimated or ignored. People are the foundation of any successful endeavour, and Brian's report acknowledges the need for shared ownership and proactive engagement by all stakeholders, who must actively commit and contribute to eradication measures to succeed. It is also vital that we detect disease early and prevent further cattle-to-cattle spread. It is also crucial that we take the necessary measures to protect currently clear herds. I welcome Brian's cattle proposals with interest. The report contains just under 40 proposals. While they are Brian's proposals to me, not all of them therefore constitute departmental policy at this time. I am determined they are considered and worked through at pace. Those that are reflective of existing policy positions, as set out in the 2022 strategy, can be implemented more quickly, while others, which require further assessment to determine their feasibility and affordability. That assessment, as will every other aspect of our work to eradicate bovine TB, will be best carried out through collaboration and partnership working. I am therefore moving immediately to confirm my acceptance of Brian's proposal that a new bovine TB partnership steering group should be established, comprising representatives from farming, wildlife and veterinary communities. I intend to have this group set up by the start of January. Its first task will be to work through, with the CVO, the proposals in his paper in a spirit of co-design, with a particular focus on identifying the immediate priorities for action and steps needed to put them in place. This cannot be a lengthy process, and I will therefore be looking for a delivery plan from the group before the end of March, accompanied by a communications plan. In establishing this group, we will build on the learning from previous TB eradication partnership, including to make sure that we have members who will bring not only the right expertise, but also a clear focus on delivering in the wider public interest. I also intend to take forward Brian's proposals for increased intergovernmental working across the UK and Ireland, and will be writing to my ministerial counterparts in the coming days to seek their support for this. Brian has also highlighted the importance of strong and effective governance at all levels, and I'm pleased to confirm that the Department's own internal governance and programme management structures for bovine TB will be reviewed to ensure that they are capable of providing the assurance needed. Eradicating bovine TB will require significant effort and investment across the sector, and it is important that we continue to make sure that we have our own house in order before we ask other stakeholders to do the same. This is an important report. It contains analysis and proposals that we all need to carefully consider. As the CVO notes, its publication represents a new step forward on the path to control and eradicate this disease. We in government will play our part, but we'll only make the progress we all want to see if we have farmer, veterinary, industry, NGOs buy-in across all 3 pillars that Brian highlights, which is people, including culture and behaviour, cattle and wildlife. In conclusion, I am extremely grateful to Brian for his report, completed in a very short space of time. I would urge everyone to consider the report and digest the information provided. The status quo is not an option. Change over short, medium and long term is essential. By all means, let's discuss and respectfully debate its proposals, but also please recognise that only by working together are we going to be able to firmly tackle this issue. It is my sincere hope and desire that we see publication of the report as a turning point, an impetus to put us on a trajectory towards the eradication of bovine TB. Do you want to say a few words? Yeah.
Thank you, Minister, and good morning to all members. As the Minister has highlighted, you have received a copy, which hopefully you've had a chance to get a look through. And I'll just give you a brief overview here of what it contains and the findings and the recommendations and proposals contained within. And it's broken into 3 sections. Section 1 of the review provides the background situation, what TB is, basically the current epidemiology around it, why it's important to have a TB programme in place, not just from a public health and animal health point of view, but also from a trade point of view, and trade in our trade in cattle and cattle products is dependent on having a functioning TB programme. Section 2 then outlines what I consider to be the key constraints and challenges and structural issues that we have to address if we're to effectively tackle TB. And then Section 3 goes on to provide an assessment of what proposals what I have suggested proposals that we need to implement to address the barriers that are there in Section 2 if we want to address the problem that we have and advance TB control and eradication. So, as the Minister's outlined, the recommendations I have built them around 3 pillars for, I think it's easier to understand, and they're around the people, cattle and wildlife. And the important thing is it has to be a holistic package of measures. They all have to be integrated and they all have to be advanced simultaneously. And we have to address the sources and where the sources of disease are and where they persist in all aspects. And that's the important thing. Basically, a holistic, integrated approach is required here. We can't do bits and pieces. So, actions aimed at changing the culture and advancing real partnership between industry and government are critical. We'll not do this government alone. It has to be a true partnership in every sense of the word as we seek to control and eradicate TB. And that's going to be centred around the establishment of the TB Partnership Steering Group that the Minister has agreed to advance as ASAP. So that will be key to moving things forward in the spirit of collaboration and working in respect for everybody's views. There are also recommendations on how we improve communications and education around the disease. For too long, probably TB has been seen really as a government problem. We need to make it visible again as really as the infectious genetic disease that it is and the impact it has on communities and farms and animals. So we need to get that out there, and there is a vital piece of work around that. So because there is a general apathy and fatigue around it that's there, and this thing has been going on for 70 years, so it's very understandable. So we need to change that, and that's a vital part, as we say. Also, science, it'll underpin our policy and our decision and all the decisions we take, and we need to have good science in the background here. And I've touched on that proposal on that as well, and also in research related to that. In relation to the cattle, which is the second pillar, I divided into 3 themes. One is obviously disease surveillance and detection. The other is managing infected herds, and the third, which is something we do overlook, is protecting those herds that are clear. Just go through them one by one. Disease surveillance and detection. I've touched on a few things. What can we do better there? How can we look to enhance our testing strategies? How can we make them better? And that is to do with our PVP engagement and getting the best testing out there done in the most effective way and efficient way possible. Also, it looks at the abattoir surveillance and also looks at the tuberculin that we're using. Management of infected herds. I've looked at basically what can we do to eradicate and eliminate that disease out of these herds as quick as possible and as efficiently as possible. A particular focus has been on these chronic breakdowns they're a serious factor in TB. That's one of the propensities. There's a propensity of certain herds to develop these prolonged and recurrent breakdowns, and they're a substantial contributor to the problem we have and the numbers of reactors that we're finding. So there's a special piece in this, and I think it's a chronic herd task force is what's needed there to deal with that. I've also looked at the purchasing policies, other testing such as the blood test, the gamma blood test, and other alternative tests that are out there. The third point of the cattle interventions, which I really want to touch on, is we need to really change the way we talk about it here, TB. We have 90% of herds that are free of TB. And what are we actually doing to protect them herds and keep them free and actually building that number? Rightly, our focus should be on eradicating and eliminating on them 10% that have the problems, and that's right, but we also need to focus on the 90% and keep them the way they are and then increase that number. And it's something that we've probably overlooked. So I've looked at a few things around that, and I'm suggesting the informed purchasing, biosecurity. How can we have a lot of movements of animals in Northern Ireland, as we all know, with farming practices that we have. How can we mitigate the risk associated with that movement? Pre and post movement testing, things like that. We can build things in around biosecurity, good farming practices that help. On wildlife then, which is the third one, we touched on the third of the 3 big pillars. I've basically undertaken the work of the review, looks at all the various wildlife intervention options that are out there, and looks at them all available, and has made a recommendation on a way forward, and it's constructed really on the TVR model, but not the TVR with bits extra on it, and that's what it's founded on. And it is the one that's really, it gathers a lot of the attention at the minute, is the wildlife, but it's one of the 3 pillars, and it's important to remember there's 2 other pillars there as well. Lastly, there are 2 other things I have touched on, and they're a wee bit separate, but it's compensation. And I've made a few suggestions around the current compensation regime and ensuring that it encourages good practice, and how can we use it to encourage good practice. And we have to think about that. The suggestions I've made is around table valuation, and I've one point there on reducing compensation for animals that have been bought into herds that actually go down in the same breakdown. We have, I think the figures there, they're in the paper. Over the last 2 years, we have bought 2,500 cattle back that went down with TB, that have been bought into herds that have subsequently went down the same breakdown. And we need to do better there. So we do. We need to make sure that risk is managed, and can we share that risk a bit better, and can we encourage good practice around that, because I do understand and appreciate the need to maintain business viability, so it's important to get that balance right, but it needs to be right, and we can't be adding fuel to a fire at times. Other things about compensation is anybody contravening the programme rules. And then finally, one thing that probably hasn't been aired yet, and is the concept of regionalisation. No country has ever eradicated TB unless they've used that concept anywhere. And Australia and New Zealand mainly been the 2 that have really advanced it. And we have to do something different. We have to get our controls targeted on areas, and have that not a one-size-fits-all, but have it bespoke to the epidemiology in that area, the most appropriate model for dealing with it, and develop subpopulations with a high health status, and gradually use that as our launch pad for strategically advancing this across Northern Ireland everywhere, so we can make really headway in this. So it's really about a proof of concept where we deploy a holistic package of measures in a subpopulation of Northern Ireland. And I do believe that's something that we really need to take forward, and it allows the focus of resources. It gets really good stakeholder engagement. It shows this can be done. It shows we can eradicate TB in an area, and also it gets the buy-in and that energy and forward momentum that we sadly need. It just should be made clear that this document is, first and foremost, it's a review of mine. It's my personal opinion on a lot of things, recommendations and proposals that I've submitted to the Minister. It's not departmental policy yet. There needs to be a significant amount of work to look at a lot of this regarding the policy development, the financial assessments, legislative assessments, the various impact assessments, and then ultimately consideration by the Minister in the time ahead. I'm happy to take questions now and any time afterwards and meet any of you to discuss it in further detail. So what we do, if we need more time after today, I'm free to discuss it after as need be. So, but thank you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Bran. I didn't do a preamble because certainly since taking up this post, I've noted that outside of the budget, TB is absolutely, in terms of the farming community, the number one topic that they would raise with me. I know with members already speaking this morning, receiving the paper yesterday, whilst welcome, give us very little time to prep, but I know that a lot of us stayed up late to get through it, and even up early this morning to look at it. So, and I do welcome, Minister, that you said out at the very start that you're open to a conversation, and perhaps a robust conversation, but we need to get, we need to see action on this. Members, we've literally got 40 minutes, and I am going to keep, no one's going to get more than 5 minutes. I'm just going to it'd be as nice as that if someone goes to 5 minutes, I'm going to have to move on to ensure that all members get a chance to ask questions. So I'll keep my questions brief, but I'll try and get as many questions in as possible. Brent, you intimated that this is your own words. Did you get a terms of reference from the Minister in regards to this, as to where you would pitch and operate this paper?
The request was to do a review of TB in Northern Ireland at the current situation and suggestions for the way forward. Okay.
In regard, Minister, you had said that, and you said that, and I'm pretty sure I know what you meant, and this is not to be naughty. You said delivery plan by the end of March. You did mean March 2025, I hope?
Yes.
Okay, because as politicians we're really good.
You're okay. No, I think it's important, and I know that we'll have this discussion within the committee about the desire to take forward actions, because we need to drive down TB, not just for the issue in terms of the cost to my department, But more fundamentally, it's in terms of the cost to our farming communities in Northern Ireland and also the wider industry and the mental anguish that this is causing. But fundamentally, for us to be able to give people hope for the future, we've got to do this together, because that's the only way I believe that collectively we're going to be able to do this, is actually through a partnership model. And this has given us this very short time frame, because we have this partnership model established at the beginning of January. That's given them really up until sort of middle of March to be able to come back with a delivery plan. But I think that's the way to go, so we can actually go through this. And also, Chair, to your point around the report, if people want to engage with myself or with Brian around the report and have further discussions, we're open to that, because we think an informed discussion around the issues and being able to tease out any concerns or clarifications, we're happy to facilitate that.
Thank you. In my brief synopsis of the report, I think it's a quantitative and qualitative report. The only thing that sits out for me is that I didn't see too much new in it that wasn't already known, except perhaps for the regionalisation. And this isn't necessarily a critique, because if new evidence isn't forthcoming. So if the body is set up and to report by the end of March, what's the timeline for boots on the ground and to see the action plan actually rolled out, and where farmers are going to see that difference?
So I'll let Brian come in, but one of the issues we have to consider is there are resources to be able to take things forward, whether we need to do consultation on some other areas, and also legislative provisions. So some issues will be able to move faster than others. The strategy from 2022 will provide a basis to take some things potentially forward a bit faster than other issues. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
No, that's right, and everything will the proposals in here that are already in the strategy, they can obviously be advanced at a lot more pace. There's some will need to be developed and go through all the policy development process, such as the new wildlife intervention strategy, and there's work ongoing in the background at the minute to advance that and bring that information forward and present it to the Minister in due course.
Thank you. I see this that you've got three pillars. I've got two in terms of the actual operations, which is one is intervention and one is prevention. And it's good to see the preventative piece in there, but intervention is obviously going to be our first step, I would imagine. In that regard, one of my criticisms just going through the jobs in the past that I've had is that sometimes bad behaviour is repaid by bad management. Bad management sometimes is making everybody pay for the sins of a small amount of people. So this is maybe in regard to the tapered compensation that I want to get at. From what I can see in terms of what I can identify, so any sort of poor behaviour or poor management of cattle is a very small amount of farmers. Is it fair to have a tapered compensation scheme to capture everybody when it's perhaps only a small amount of operators that are operating in a rogue manner?
I'll say something briefly and then Brian will come in, but there's a lot of good practice going on within our farming community. It's reflected in the fact, as Brian's outlined, that 90% of our herds are free from bovine TB. But what we want to do is we want to encourage and incentivise good practice, whether that's through the proactive measures such as communications and engagement and through other things. And that's why the partnership's going to be absolutely key, where we can tease through what are the tools we've got to ensure that those that are doing well are that we continue like that, and for those who need encouragement and advice and support, that we can do that as well.
No, that's right. And the compensation, there's nothing really, the compensation staying as is, and recommendation there, the only recommendation I have made around compensation specifically is to look at them herds that are buying in animals into high risk areas. So how can we make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure we're not bringing animals into a diseased environment and exposing them to disease unnecessarily, and then expecting the public purse to pick up the bill for it. You know, so it's not, there's nothing there to say there's any compensation going to be reduced in that. As such, there's no tapering. It's just if we do the right thing, there'll be no issue there.
Okay, I'm going to stick to my word. I am going to bring in the deputy chair, but I'm going to stick to 5 minutes, guys. You are going to be timed, and if you've less time, fine. But go ahead, Declan. Thank you.
I'll not take more than 5 minutes.
Good man, thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Brian, for coming here, and commend you on the report as well, Brian. I suppose what I'm going to ask, this is a topic that has been researched and reported and reviewed and researched and reported and reviewed for years, and with this latest review and now we're going to have an hour consultation. I suppose what I want to know is that we had the TB Eradication Partnership, which produced a very comprehensive set of proposals. So how is this new body which has been proposed, how is that going to differ from what already we've been doing for years?
I'll come in briefly, but Brian and I have talked about this in terms of the reviews that I've done previously. And someone standing in strategically looking back on this in recent weeks, there's one thing that fundamentally I think it's held us back, is not having that ability for us to be able to focus on a holistic strategy of all of the 3 pillars and to work in partnership on it. And there's other examples where there has been genuine partnership between industry and government, and also it's been a bit more holistic, but we've been able to move on it. And I think that's the lesson that we've got to learn. And it's probably today's plea for me as Minister, that we come together on this and we work together on these issues. Because if we don't do that and we don't actually do this in a genuine spirit of partnership, we're probably going to continue to be stuck in the cycle that we're in. And the cycle that we're in now is really, really critical, because the levels of infection are really not sustainable for the farming community, nor for my department. I don't want to come in and say a bit more.
No, that's right. There has been, we've talked about TB a long time, but for one reason or another things have start, but we've never actually advanced anything. A lot of the previous strategy recommendations are sitting in here. They all are. They're all very good recommendations. There's a few more on top of it. So there is, but we need to actually get in on this. We need to come together as a partnership, a true partnership across all the sectors and advance this. We're not going to do it on our own. Everybody needs to be here, and it's going to be challenging, because there's going to be hard decisions needed, but we're well ready to have them conversations. And you know what, things might need adjusted a bit, but we need to have them discussions. There may be better ways of doing things. We're open to them suggestions. Can we have these discussions? We've never really advanced them properly yet into a proper delivery plan and delivered it on through into actions. We've got it to paper, but we need to really put this into real life.
Thanks for that. And on the report, I haven't could read it all in enough detail yet, but I've glanced through it. Basically, they'd reference the TVR. Now, you can correct me on this, but my understanding previously from the last reports that would have been produced, that TVR can't really work unless you actually bring down the actual level of badgers in the hotspot areas. And my understanding that there's an area of the north which is around 12% of the area of the north, I could be wrong in saying that, where the badgers, which are TB hotspots, but the badger levels are so high that they need to be brought down before TVR would have any success. So this seems to be proposing TVR without a cull. Is that doable?
And that Brian came in, but in terms of the wildlife issue, I think it's important that I say that there's been no decisions taken in relation to this, and I'm very conscious of not only the outcome from the judicial review, but also that there's a concurrent piece of work underway, which completed will give me a full departmental assessment of the merits of the different wildlife intervention options.
Declan, obviously with the TVR or any wildlife intervention, we know that the three options are the cull, the vaccination, and the TVR, or a combination thereof of them all. You're right whenever you say, and this is my sense of it, or my reading on it, and my understanding, that for vaccination to be successful, we need to have a method of population control. Now, how you do population control, and what I mean by population control is to reduce the infectious burden within the badger population. So you can do that either selectively or non-selectively. You have two options. TVR is the selective option, so you only remove the infectious badgers before you vaccinate. The non-selective option is whenever you go with an indiscriminate cull. So TVR does allow you to bring down the infectious burden at the same time as vaccinating the population alongside it. It has both things together, does both of them together, whereas a cull only does one. So you're advancing it, and also by doing it, you're mitigating against risks of perturbation as well from surrounding areas.
Yeah.
And also, if you go on your TVR, as I have suggested there, which is an advancement of the traditional TVR model as such, is that if you do encounter a really high, it allows you to identify the badger density and the prevalence of TB within a certain area, wherever you go. After a year, you would know that data. We have not got that data at the minute of what it is, of what the density. We have the road traffic accident survey on badger prevalence, a TB prevalence in badgers, which is sitting around 20%. If we're to use the evidence from this Republic of Ireland, they have areas and hotspots where it could be 50%. I'm not saying we have that, I'm not saying we're any different from that, we just don't know. The TVR would allow you to get that information. We know that there's heterogeneity in badger density and badger prevalence across Northern Ireland. That's already been, research has already shown that. The TVR would allow you to pick that up in its first year and then allow you to adjust your methodology. Should you need to go to a straight proactive cull if the prevalence of TB was significantly, if it was so high that vaccination was not going to work, because we know vaccination of infected badgers is not going to be successful, it's pointless. So what the TVR does, it gives you that database, it gives you that data set, and it gives you a foundation on which to make a more informed decision based on the epidemiology of the disease to move forward. And you can either go to vaccination or you can go to cull afterwards, or both, or you can stay on the same track that you're on. So it gives you the option. So it's not ruling anything out.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I just have to apologise. I have to get the members in. It's 11 o'clock hard stop for the Minister. I want to give everybody a chance. And if you could, I know we need to get into some detail, but if we can get it. Thank you. Michelle?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
And thank you both for coming this morning. And it's a really comprehensive report, and thank you for that. And obviously it does give a state of the nation. But I suppose what I am concerned about is that obviously over the last number of months, Minister, you've relied very heavily on this report coming out, and it's really the perception and I suppose the expectation of the sector as to what this will deliver. And I suppose the onus really is on you as to how then you present this report to the sector. And I'm interested to know the conversations perhaps that you have had to date with the sector around what's being recommended here today, because there will be naturally a concern that what it looks like on the surface is perhaps not a carrot and stick approach or a partnership approach as you've suggested perhaps, but just a stick approach. And I'm suggesting that because what we do see within the report are suggestions for reduction of herds, reduction of compensation, restricted movements, and I appreciate that of course some of that will have to happen. But the issue in relation to wildlife, which has already been indicated by the previous speaker, will be perhaps on the longer finger. And I am keen to know that whenever you are introducing measures, that they will be done in parallel so that the industry doesn't feel that it's having to take all the burden while the Minister and the Department is shying away from what are very difficult decisions, which I did suggest in the debate last week.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. And I think the only way we're going to be able to do this in terms of taking things forward is a balanced approach, and that's the whole genesis of what the partnership has to be about. And in terms of wildlife interventions, as I've outlined, there will be, and there's a requirement for us to do a consultation in that regard. There is aspects in the report that are absolutely critical that we discuss that within the partnership. I think the worst thing today would have been if I had taken the report and said, these are the tablets of stone, this is what me as Minister is saying we are doing, because that actually then defeats the whole purpose of what we want to achieve, is actually have this partnership model where we do this together, and I think that is absolutely critical. I don't see it as a carrot and stick. I don't see it as at all. I actually see this as a real positive opportunity to move forward. I'm not going to shy away from difficult decisions on this and on other issues, because I think our politics have been failed in the past where we've done that. But what we've got to do is we've got to explain the why we're looking at these issues, and that's why I'm glad that the report is going to be published publicly today, so it'll have an informed discussion around the issue. People can digest it, and then we move into the partnership model and right at the beginning of the new year to tease through some of these things. A number of these issues are for discussion within the partnership model. They're not a done deal, and that's for us to be able to discuss what best ways we can do going forward, because we've got our role to play and industry have got their role to play as well.
There's a few things there that regarding the approach here. I think the important thing is first, this is suggestions and recommendations, right? They have to be co-designed and developed. A lot of these things are progressive, graduated approaches. What's in this paper isn't fit for today. It might be fit for 10 years' time, whenever we're in a different picture. But we need to know where we're going and where we need to get to. So there is different measures at different stages. So that's where your delivery plan would come in. So you'd bring things in. But importantly, this has to be co-designed with industry. If it's not, and it's not their plan as well, it's not going to work. I haven't made any reference to reducing herd size in this. what I have highlighted is herd size is a significant risk factor. It's probably the main risk factor for TB. Our big herds is where our most significant burden of TB is sitting. We need to identify different ways of managing them and how we help farmers to manage that risk with them to do it better, so TB becomes a less of a burden on them. That's how we do things differently for there. It's not about reducing size. Surely it reduces risk, definitely, but there's other things we can bring in there that are touched on in the paper that we can do to help these farmers. As regards restricting movements, it's not restricting movements as such. It's trying to constrain. We have a lot of movements. Can we identify the high risk movements and can we mitigate the risk? I want to protect 90% of herds here from getting affected. What can I do to tell them people there's a risk associated with the move, and how can we mitigate that risk the best way possible? There's a lot of ways of doing it. I have some suggestions in here. There might be better suggestions. I'm happy to take them on board. And as somebody said, the science with TB is changing all the time. We're getting better, we know more. But there's also a lot of conflicting advice, as you know. So we have to wade our way through that too. But I think going back to the thing, this has to be done with industry and in partnership with them. And I mean truly in partnership. But there is going to be hard decisions. This isn't going to be easy on anybody. Because if it was, we'd already have done it. That's why we are here. This is going to be a challenge, and there is going to be critical decisions that are going to have to be made to advance this going forward. But we have to do it together.
Thank you, and apologies, Michelle. That's 5 minutes 30. Believe it or not, I'm going. Yeah, William, you're next. Sorry, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming along. And it is a wide-ranging report, and I'm sure most of us, my eyes last night, I glanced through it. I didn't. There's no point telling you I read it all because I felt like going to bed at a certain time. In relation to pre-movement testing, some concerns in and around that could have affected livestock marts. Initially, in what context do you envisage pre-test and movements coming into play?
With pre-movement testing, you're aware of animal health law, that is the legislation that's going to applies here, and it brings in a requirement for pre-movement testing. And there's two. It brings in a requirement. It also brings in a derogation. And the requirement it brings in is, at a minimum, or you should pre-movement test animals within 30 days before they go. But there is a derogation there within it that you can, any animal that has been tested within the last 6 months and has been in a herd that has tested within the last 6 months does not have to be subjected to pre-movement testing. So, again, to me, pre-movement testing is around protecting herds. How do we bring it in? That's for discussion. It's going to become a legislative requirement. It's in there in legislation. So it's not something we can really ignore. But it's also a tool we can use to our advantage. So how can we use it best to mitigate risk and protect? What I'm really on about is protecting them herds that are clear, so they know what they're getting. But how can we use it? And we can talk about that and design it in the best way.
It's using it the way it could pose a problem for livestock marts, whereby it creates a bigger difficulty for people.
It's a barrier. It creates a hurdle that has to be, and it creates an expense.
Yeah, and the cost is going to be on the farmer, isn't that right?
Mm. Yeah. It's an expense, yes. And how do we do it? The brucellosis one was an example. We brought in pre-movement testing. That pre-movement testing was probably one of the key factors in helping us eradicate brucellosis. Now, TB is a bit different, but it's a tool in the toolbox. What I look at TB is there's no silver bullet out there as such. It's doing a lot of small things well that are going to feed into a big picture and holistic and integrate them.
Some farmers were saying, well, I have no TB for years. I'm tested every year. I've been clear this last 10 years. Why should I have to pre-test? You can understand the position.
And you can understand that position, and we're happy to discuss that. There's become a legislative responsibility. We want to target our interventions where they're most useful. We don't want to be doing things for the sake of doing them, because that's not going to serve anybody any purpose. But the position we're in at the minute, the prevalence of TB and incidence it's worrying, and
absolutely
we need to start taking action to do it, because we've talked for long enough, and we need to really advance these.
I've no call to say this to you, but you're fully aware that there's different strains of TB. Like, I have a large herd myself, and I've seen 2 animals down, or 3 out of 100 down. Go to another herd and there's 100 down. So there's obviously different strains of TB, more prevalent than others. So can they not be identified to home in on those?
Yes, and we are doing a lot of research. It's going to be focused on the strain types and where the spread's coming from, and why some herds are having these explosive outbreaks.
Yeah.
And is it the farming practice? Is the things? We have a lot of work to do there. We have to do better as a department and help farmers in that, and investigate better and communicate better and really get in there and work along with the private vets. I think there's a great opportunity there to get the private vet more engaged in this work and more engaged in the breakdown. But you're exactly right. There's work to be done there.
No, I think so. I think the different strains. I mean, if you've 800 cattle and 2 animals are down, go to an hour, there's 150 down. There's something badly wrong. There's a big difference in the strain of TB. It would look like to me. Okay, thank you.
William, thank you so much. That was you were definitely at the effective questioning session for sure. That was excellent. Thank you so much. Nicola, beat that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister and Brian, for attending and for your report as well. I have a couple of questions. First of all, excuse me if it's a little daft, but could you maybe explain, when you're talking about the TVR approach, first of all, how you actually do vaccinate badgers, how time-consuming it is, and how costly it is?
It is, as you're saying, it's labour intensive and it's costly. I haven't got the exact costs of it here. We can get them for you based on our experience before. We have TVR is a fairly new approach. Obviously we had a trial here in the Banbridge area a number of years ago. I've had to get you the figures, but you're exactly right. It's the most labour intensive, the most expensive method of wildlife intervention.
What do you actually do? That's what I'm saying. It might be a daft question, but
well, you have to catch the badger first, and then you basically sedate the badger to get the blood sample to test it, and then based on it, you test there at the size. That's similar to the COVID test you have.
right.
So it gives you an instant result, and then you make a decision based on the result that you have. So is it vaccination or is it euthanasia, basically? So any infected badger is euthanized, and then a healthy badger is vaccinated.
And has that approach been used elsewhere, like in any other country or anything before?
No, we as you know, we done a trial. France are employing it at the minute. The Republic of Ireland are looking into it. They haven't deployed it yet, but they're looking into it. And that hasn't been deployed anywhere yet. But France are the one that's really they're taking it ahead at the
They're
minute.
pioneering it now. Okay, thank you. And obviously, a lot of discussion around bovine TB and the spread of it is always focused on badgers. But I know within your report and other discussions, it's noted that deer also can carry TB. Are there any other animals that you're aware of that would carry it as well? And what's your approach to tackling the spread of TB through the deer population?
Deer, as you can touch on the paper, deer is the science isn't robust behind that. We're picking it up in deer. Are they a real factor in the epidemiology of deer here in Northern Ireland? That's questionable. Yet some people might say in some of the beside the forests, they say there's a risk factor there, definitely. Wicklow is the area in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, that have an issue, and they're really doing a lot of work on that at the moment to see how it is in epidemiology. That will be a real problem if it gets into the deer population, because you have two wildlife hosts then, which really, if we wait much longer and we do encounter that sort of situation, you're really going to be in trouble to manage it. What we'd be proposing there is, let's get a bit more ecology done in the deer population. What's happening there? What is the population in the wild deer? What is the prevalence of TB there? It's work that hasn't really been taken forward here yet and needs to be taken forward, but it's a very valid point. It can be found in our wildlife. Sheep have found it, pigs have found it, cats have got it, so TB is getting there. And I think the big thing is, one thing, we don't really regard TB as a disease anymore. I mean, as a clinical disease. Nobody has really seen a sick animal with TB anymore. I think it's probably, you have to go back to our parents and maybe they have seen it. It's that long ago. And there's an issue there, because you don't see it like BVD, like salmonella, like any of the other diseases, and you don't relate to it as much because you see a healthy animal being lifted out, and that doesn't help.
Yeah.
But that's where the visibility of disease needs to come back on the radar again.
That's fair enough. Listen, I'm very aware of time.
You have a 1 minute question and answer.
I wanted to ask about the regionalisation. Is that contradictory to increased intergovernmental working? Obviously, like TB is an issue across the island of Ireland, and it's important that you are working with your counterparts in the south and that. So is the regionalisation like a contradiction to that, or can they work hand in hand?
They can work hand in hand, and that will be the wish. And we have a shared problem, and we have a shared vision for advancing the solutions of it. And there is a great opportunity there in working with our colleagues. They have done a lot more work than we have. We're well behind them, to be honest. But regionalisation really does offer us an opportunity there, really, to advance this. And what I see regionalisation is, it provides you with the evidence that this is going to work in an area, and this will work if we do it. And you can advance that as a broader strategic approach. And you can take whatever areas you want, but it's very important to choose your area carefully to make sure you have the right boundaries. And that's very important for regionalisation. But we have done I've done a bit of work in the background at looking at areas where I think this could be deployed successfully. Now, it would need big stakeholder engagement and commitment, but that's where the TB eradication partnership that we established would be one of their things to drive forward with us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And here's going to be our big test now. Patsy, stick to your 5 minutes, please.
I'll be sharp here and quick.
Thank you.
First thing is, Brian, you emphasised at the very start here that this document is one that's review undertaken by yourself. So I want to just get it clear in my mind, because I'm unclear what the status of this document is as regards the department. Is it a discussion document? Is it a pending policy document? Is it going to be adopted in part or in total by the department? Because otherwise what we're doing is we're into hypothesis. So maybe that's a question for you, Minister, as opposed to Brian.
No problem. So this is Brian, as Chief Veterinary Officer's view around the issue after I asked him to commission it. What we need to do then is to step through, and I need to get advice about relevant aspects of it. I've already made a view that I want to take forward in setting up the stakeholder partnership, and also want to strengthen those liaison between north, south, east, west, primarily between CVOs. So that's the initial step I've taken from the report. What we need to do over the time ahead then is take out of the relevant report what other aspects we are going to ask for advice on, and then we work through the partnership in relation to this. So by sort of middle or end of March, you'll have a very clear idea what we're taking from this, what stuff we're putting, for more medium and more long term.
So at this point, it's a discussion document.
It's clearly obviously providing a discussion here with
a lot of work going into it, granted, but it's a discussion document.
Yeah, I think it gives us a lot of really, really useful suggestions in terms of how we actually move forward to drive this down. And I think that's what's absolutely key. Is also, to be honest, in terms of being able to deal with this issue and the speed that we need to do it. I put my best person onto this, which is Brian, a CVO, and I think it's actually a game changer in terms of how we actually deal with these issues.
Okay. That leads me on to the next point. Has the previous strategy now been set aside?
No.
To be superseded by what's happening here? What?
So the previous strategy stays, and what we're doing in terms of this review and this report, this gives us a clear impetus towards delivery, not just upon areas within the strategy, because some aspects of the 2022 strategy have not been delivered or been partially delivered, but also additional actions out of that. So these are actions we can take to turbocharge our drive to drive down TV.
You're all aware, and people in this room are aware, of the cost, the public purse, cost to families, basically people have been bereft about the loss of their herds, and we really don't want to be getting into the territory of reinventing the wheel.
Go back to it.
There's a lot that, in terms of previous reports, that hasn't been progressed. I think some elements of that has been that there's been a very strong focus in terms of one of the pillars of intervention, which is around wildlife, but I'm very clear we must take a holistic strategy going forward, and that's what I absolutely beg people to do, is to look at the report and for us to take a holistic strategy going forward, because the only way we're going to achieve the eradication of bovine TB is through that holistic strategy and those three pillars that have been outlined by Brian. Otherwise we're just going to be in the same situation year after year, and we're going to have more mental anguish within our farming communities, and we owe them better than that.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
That's a gold star for you today, Patsy. Thank you so much. And John Blair, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister and Brian, for being here. And Brian, thank you for the report. I'm always minded when we're having these conversations that the history of this debate and issue has always focused around cattle versus badgers, and the report helps in pointing out that it's a much wider issue, and that I'm going to come to the biosecurity thing in a minute. But before I do, can I just highlight another important issue for myself, which is that there are a wide range of views across society, particularly on the wildlife piece. This committee and of course the department have a remit also for wildlife, although thus far we may not have spent as much time on that, on nature, recovery, etc., as we have on other things, but all of these things relate. So two things with that backdrop. The biosecurity piece, given the importance of public confidence in that wider society that I mentioned a moment ago, includes consumers, of course. The report states clearly that the biosecurity issue is largely a voluntary activity across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And then it goes on to say, and this is regrettable, of course, that farm biosecurity is generally regarded as poor in Northern Ireland. So, in that regard, A, what can we do in the context of the report to make that better? And B, does that not strengthen the argument for there to be some sort of penalty available if people are not stepping up to whatever measure is put in place around biosecurity? And then the second question, I'll just put two in together if you don't mind, on the TVR issue. TVR was trialled in Northern Ireland, I think it was around 2014, 2015, and focused mainly around an area of County Down, and as far as I'm concerned was regarded as successful, although never rolled out. Can the review that's going to take place and the examination of the issue that's going to take place with the new group, can that look at that previous history of that as well and take that on board?
I'll let Brian come back to most of that, but biosecurity is a key component of how we be able to drive down bovine TB, but it's not everything. It's one of the tools in our toolbox, and the scale of the problem we have here is where you need to use every single tool that's in our toolbox to drive this down. So we can't cast aside one thing because it's too difficult or too hard. We've got to do it all. And this is all about incentives for good practice. There's lots of good practice that's going on there, and what we want to do is we want to ensure that that is recognised, and we encourage that. So rather than penalties, this is about incentivification around it all, and that's what's my entire focus. I know the situation we have here. I'm very aware of it. I'm aware of the herd sizes we've got. I do not seek to reduce that, but what I seek to do is find a sustainable way forward, and the current situation is not sustainable. It's not sustainable in relation to both the farming community nor my department, so that's what our focus is on that. Do you want to come up with one?
Just a couple of points there on compensation for biosecurity. I'd rather reward good practice. I think it'll get much more from a human social science and human behaviour point of view. Let's incentivise good practice, what we want, and let's encourage it and let's support it, as opposed to the corollary of that. TVR, the TVR done before was really, what was the objective of it? It probably wasn't, it was only really to see could we vaccinate badgers, and that was basically what was broadly around. It didn't really go into looking at really what impact it had on the TB in the surrounding area, and we had COVID just at the end of it too, which really didn't help. So there was a few complicating factors in it, but it was a start. It showed it can be done. It showed it can reduce the prevalence of TB in badgers, but it showed that there's more work to do on it.
So, Chair, I should probably clarify that the question I asked there around the biosecurity and potential penalties was only because I'm sure the Minister and Brian would agree that if there are those who continue with bad behaviour, it could have a very negative impact on those that are pursuing good behaviour and setting a very good example. Particularly when we already know the impact of this issue on the well-being of our farming community, first of all, but also the financial impact on farms and on the department. So my worry is that if bad practice continues...
This is the key thing, John. This is about we need to do this together, because this is a collective problem. It's not just government, it's not just farming, it's not individual farmers. We're all collectively affected by this. It affects the wider industry. You speak to the processors around it all, and like if this report and today does not provide an opportunity for a reset, then I don't know what will.
You missed it, but that's bang on 5 minutes, John. If you're content. Thank you, and members, just want to thank you for your forbearance with myself. I wanted to bring everybody in. Just want to mention that Declan was very live to Anya, and Anya did get asking a question through Declan, so it's just part of the the conversation here and part of the committee. Minister, if you don't mind, I can ask one question of Brian just before you go, and I do know you need to go. You talked about vaccination with badges, which was talked about. In the paper it mentions two things. One is not necessarily, you did say that it doesn't mention herd size, but it does talk about herd concentration. There's one other thing about vaccination of cattle, perhaps in the future, as part of that prevention. Is there anything you want to add in regard to that?
I'll just talk briefly, and the report outlines in terms of the intensification that has occurred within with regards to herd sizes and particularly within dairy. I'm aware of that. People are very, very aware of that as an issue. The challenge is we need to work towards solutions about doing things sustainably going forward, and I think that's hopefully the message you're getting from ourselves. That's what we're focused on, working in partnership to give us a bit of hope. On the vaccination of cattle, you know that there was recent announcements from DEFRA around this, and now this is not going to come any time soon, but it is something that we're monitoring quite closely.
And we do work closely with our colleagues in England and Wales and Scotland, and they have as you know, a big research trial on getting a vaccination. Vaccination is prohibited in the EU and in the EU law for TB because we can't differentiate vaccinated animals from infected animals, and basically we're looking to get a test that can do that distinction, and that's where the research is focused on. Now it's a number of years away yet. There's good progress being made, and we can get you updates on that if you'd like them. We can do that, but it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, so we need to advance. We can't wait for that as the solution.
I appreciate that you did give us a little bit of extra time today, Minister. So on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you, and I'm sure we will, I'll not say lock horns, but I'm sure we'll discuss this further in the Chamber and at committee. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Okay, members, we do have a big schedule today. I'm sure we will come back to this as committee, but I'm going to move on to agenda item 2, which is Chairperson's Business. Chairperson's Business, item number 1. Members, last Thursday we met with the rural groups in Loughry College and agreed to start consideration at this week's meeting of some possible committee actions in response to what we heard. I propose that we do this at the end of the meeting in closed session, if you're content. Thank you, members. Okay, item number 3 are the minutes of the 19th of November and 21st of November. Members, I refer you to pages 7 to 16 of the pack for the draft minutes dated the 19th of November. Are there any comments that you would like to record or any? Nope. Okay, if you're content, I will sign these and these will be published on the website. On pages 17 to 23 of the pack are the draft minutes for the meeting dated the 21st of November. Any comments to make in regard to those, members? No, if you're content, I will sign those and they will be published on the website. Agenda item 4 are matters arising. Matters arising number 1. Members, I refer you to the response from the Minister dated 20th of November at pages 25 to 28 of the pack in reply to our letter of the 8th of November regarding agriculture and fisheries funding. The Minister welcomes the Committee's continued support in seeking to maximise allocations to ensure stable funding going forward. As part of the Executive's 25-26 budget exercise, Minister Muir has formally asked the Minister for Finance that the resource DEL, which has been baselined in the block grant, is treated as Executive earmarked. Funding for agriculture, environment, fisheries and rural development purposes and uplifted in line with inflation. The Minister will keep the Committee updated on any developments in regard to that. Are you content to know? Thank you, members. Members, I refer you to the letter from the Department dated the 19th of November at pages 29 to 33 of the pack, giving advance notice of the publication of an initial UK Emissions Trading Scheme ETS Authority response to a consultation on the free allocation of UK ETS free allocation review. This is to address 2 permanent cessation proposals planned for implementation within the 2025 scheme year. At Appendix A to this letter, it contains a supplementary information on the permanent cessation technical changes to allow for these technical changes to take effect within the next year, the scheme year. The authority is proposing to publish an initial response to the FAR2 consultation in respect of these changes in November 24. You can tend to note, members? Yep, thank you. Members, I refer you to response from the Minister dated 19th of November at pages 34 to 37 in the pack in reply to our letter the 25th of October regarding the NIEA business plan for 24 to 25 and the update on rural agricultural planning applications. This is an update on Target 3 which was to respond to at least 75% of statutory planning consultation requests within 21 days, or otherwise agreed timeframes and additional information on performance. To note, from the 1st of April to September, 30th of September, 66% of consultations have been responded to within the 21 calendar days or 15 working days, or otherwise agreed timescales. Typically, NIEA and Marine Fisheries Division receive a total of 4,000 new statutory planning consultations annually. Target 3 is set to be a realistic target given the challenges facing NIEA in terms of experience, resource availability and other statutory and non-statutory duties. And the percentage of agricultural planning applications returned to the applicant request additional information is set at around 60%, which seems to me to be a very high return rate in that regard. I think it's useful that we might ask a few questions in that regard. What are the reasons, or what do they believe to be the reasons for the high return rate to applicants in agriculture and planning application? The department highlights the pressures on these NIE teams and the additional staff at a variety of grades, and that they are in the process of being secured. Are members content that we do, even on that point, on the 60% return served to the NIEA for an explanation, or if they have an understanding as to why that figure is so high? And do members have any other questions that they want to expand upon? Okay. Content with that one? Yeah, okay. Thank you, members. Members, I refer you to the response from the Minister dated 20th of November at pages 38 to 41 of the pack in reply to our letter dated the 11th of November regarding further information on the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme, Amendment Order 2024, including aviation, free allocation entitlements and free allocation cap. You will have heard me refer to this in plenary on Tuesday, members, and the DAERA confirmed that military flights are excluded from the scheme, and also that there will be no change to the position with respect to free allocation for Northern Ireland registered aircraft operators, as both airline operators currently registered here registered after the deadline for airline operators to submit applications, which was actually the 31st of March 2021. Are you content to note responses? Thank you, members. I refer you to the response from the Department dated the 22nd of November at pages 42 to 46 of the pack in reply to our letter on the 25th of October regarding the queries we posed after the oral briefing received on the Windsor Framework Implementation Regulations. I'm going to give you a brief summary of the main points just for the record, if that's okay. The recruitment for Head of Regulatory Divergence. The response states this is to fill an existing post within the Post-EU Exit Coordination Group in the TEO and is not a new function. Second point, the role of the ERA Committee is in scrutinising legislation. The response states that where new legislation is being made on matters where the Secretary of State has retained direction and control, DAERA anticipates that this legislation will be made at Westminster. In regards to DEFRA resource to deal with NI matters, the response states that there are dedicated resources within DEFRA to facilitate engagement with the DEFRA Secretary of State, and DAERA officials work closely with DEFRA officials to ensure the correct ministerial engagement on Northern Ireland specific matters. And the fourth point that I'd like to make is on the EU regulations on mercury. That's not the planet Mercury, by the way. Response states DAERA is setting up processes to monitor imports from the 1st of January 2025 as this data is not currently held. Officials understand that data may be available from HM Revenue and Customs, and a request has been made by NIEA for access. There is more extensive information in the response in your packs. Are you content with the response, or do members have any further queries? Members content, thank you. Agenda item 5, briefing from the Minister. We've done that. Okay. Turn the page. Agenda item 6 is the Agricultural Bill. Members, in your packet, pages 49 to 68 are the following papers. One is the letter from the Minister dated the 7th of November regarding the planned introduction of the said bill. And we have the Agriculture Bill as introduced. Then we have the explanatory and financial memorandum. And then we have the Hansard of the DAERA oral briefing to the committee, which was held on the 20th of June. Members, the Agricultural Bill was introduced on the 25th of November, and the second stage is scheduled for the 3rd of December, which is rapidly approaching. It will then be in committee stage on the 4th of December, so today is just about putting the bill on our agenda. So members, without going into the specifics of the bill at this stage, I will just take this opportunity to give us all a quick reminder of the history of our considerations on this matter before the committee, as it has been quite a few months since officials briefed the committee. At the committee meeting on the 11th of April, the committee considered a letter from the Minister informing us of his plans to consult over April and May on a bill proposal to amend 2 legacy EU CMO schemes the Minister consulted on. Firstly, making the funding for the Fruit and Vegetable Aid Scheme FVAS discretionary. 2, provide a power to make subordinate legislation which will allow amendments to be made to the assimilated law governing FVAS. And thirdly, to provide a power to make subordinate legislation which will allow amendments to be made to the assimilated law governing the Agri-Food Information and Promotion Schemes. At the committee's meeting on the 20th of June, you received an oral briefing from the bill officials which was recorded by Hansard to update the committee on the outcome of the consultation. To that, 7 responses were received, and the comments received reflected the importance of the FEAS scheme to the local mushroom sector in particular. While not universally supported, there was some understanding of the need to make funding discretionary for the Minister to prioritise. There was a call for changes to be made to the scheme as the EU scheme had improved since Brexit. At the committee meeting on the 12th of September, we considered a response from the Minister highlighting that the FES is a devolved scheme and Northern Ireland is free to consider what support best suits the needs of our horticulture sector, and the current policy review is still ongoing. However, in parallel, he is seeking primary powers through this bill to allow DAERA to make FEAS support discretionary and allow DAERA to modify this legacy scheme. Members, at next week's meeting, if the bill passes second stage, we will have a briefing from the bill clerk to remind us of the responsibilities of the committee during the committee stage and advising of the support from the bill office. We will discuss the plans for the committee stage once the bill is officially with us. However, the committee team are making the necessary advance preparations. Are there any comments in regard to this matter at this point? No?
Sorry, I should say we are hoping to have the bill officials back before Christmas again, since it was back in June when we first heard about the bill.
Okay, content. Thank you, members. Okay, agenda item 7 is the SL1, the direct payments to farmers, cross-compliance revocation regulations 2024. I'm going to refer members to pages 70 to 86 in your pack for the SL1, the direct payments to farmers, cross-compliance revocation regulations Northern Ireland 2024. DAERA intends to make this statutory rule under powers in sections 48 and 53A and paragraph 5 of Schedule 6 to the Agriculture Act 2020 to remove the provisions made under SR 2022 number 240, which was the direct payments to farmers cross-compliance amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2022, and SR of 2023 number 210 to the direct payments to farmers cross-compliance amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2023. The rule will be laid before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure, and it is anticipated that it will come into operation on the 1st of January 2025. Members, a copy of the statutory rule is attached at Annex A of this correspondence and the consultation responses at Annex B. So I welcome the following officials to brief the committee and to answer any questions after the briefing. So we have Jason Foy, Area-Based Schemes Organisational Development, and Denise Phillips. I'm just going to ask you then if you're ready to go ahead and brief the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The regulation, as proposed, reverses changes made in 2022 and 2023, and the Minister was here before you on the 6th of June to brief you on the reasons for his decision to reverse those changes. So in essence, this sets the cross-compliance penalty regime back to where it was in 2021, where repeat negligent breaches of the cross-compliance standards are regarded as automatically intentional and then would attract a higher level of penalty. This regulation is quite simple and straightforward in terms of it just amends the delegated regulations as set out in the draft SR to give effect to the Minister's decision that he discussed with you on the 6th of June. That's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to just open it up to members. I know that some members have already indicated this morning that they're interested in this topic. So Declan, I'm going to bring you in first, and I'm just going to see my comments to the end.
Yeah, I suppose looking out there, like, I think obviously you can't stress how much we support the cross-compliance regime, and that's absolutely vital. But I'm also conscious that the Loughney Action Plan recommended a review of the Nitrates Action Programme, and I'm just questioning whether we should proceed with this until we see the outcome of that review and its impacts. That would be something just, I feel like I'm putting the cart before the horse, maybe, you know.
Okay, no problem. It's obviously a matter for the committee to decide. Have you any points you want to make in regard to Declan's?
Just that the cross-compliance regime, as it is, has been in operation now for almost 20 years. And the penalty regime has been there throughout that period of time. If the Nitrates Action Plan or the Lough Neagh Action Plan change the underpinning requirements for the cross-compliance standards, i.e. the standards that farmers have to meet, the penalty regime sits there regardless and almost separate to what the standards are. If the standards are breached, the penalty regime comes into play. So the two can operate separately, and one can be updated, and the penalty regime will then take account of that and work as intended. So the standards can be changed separately to the penalty regime.
Yeah, as long as, I suppose I'm just thinking about, you wouldn't want to unfairly penalise farmers out there until that, at least until that would be published, you know, but it's just a thought from reading over it, you know.
Thank you, Declan. William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presence coming along. I have concerns in relation, and Mr. Foy will know that I have represented people in relation to cross-compliance fines on a number of occasions. Some of these fines in the past were draconian. I seen one farmer fined 59,000 from a single farm payment. The total for minor breaches, this was not environmental breaches, this was minor breaches. But minor breaches, they had a number of minor breaches. I'm not going into details on those, but they were minor, and I think Mr. Foy really accepts that. So I have concerns. Currently, the 15% that stands, if somebody had 30,000 of a single farm payment, they could be fined up to 4,500. If they had 50, they could be fined up to 7,500. So there's substantial fines already. If this reverts back, it could be 100% penalty. So I will not be supporting these SRs. I don't think it's fair. I think the penalty regime in the past was draconian and very unfair, and I think many in the department actually accepted that. Okay.
Thank you.
Just on your point, Mr. Irwin, the penalty regime through this regulation will be set back to where it was in 2021. So the instances that you describe could well occur.
Yeah.
Again, and I think the Minister in his hearing with you on the 6th of June acknowledged that, but decided that that's the policy change he wanted to pursue, and that's to say what these regulations are intended to give
even
effect to.
This is across the board, even for minor breaches. Right.
Well, these would be for repeat negligent breaches.
Yes,
so
they're deemed to be intentional.
They're automatically deemed to be intentional at the third repeat.
Which I very much would stand in the court of law, because many of those breaches were not intentional.
No, it's accepted that they were, the breach as it stands on its own, looked at in isolation, was negligent, but at the third repeat negligent breach, the regulation at the time regarded those and required the department to treat those as automatically intentional, which then attracted a higher level of penalty. And the Minister has explicitly understood that and has instructed us to change the system.
Would you accept that some of these breaches are in the main minor?
Some of these are, absolutely, but they're all of these breaches are regarded currently under the regime as negligent rather than intentional themselves. The regulations, as previously written, required the department to regard repeated negligent breaches as automatically intentional. So they weren't intentional on their own, but the fact that they were repeated required the department to treat them in that way, and that's what the Minister has asked us to bring forward in this regulation.
I think there needs to be another look taken at this. I had asked the Minister to go back and look at this. Okay.
Thank you, William. Michelle, and then John.
Thank you. I have a number of questions just to...
Yeah, we're not so
that's
pressed
okay.
this time, yeah.
So, Justin, can I ask how many scheme participants with repeated compliance penalties for negligent breaches would have incurred reductions beyond the 15% cap had the previous regime been in place over the last couple of years?
Well, this varies from year to year, but for the year 2023, 35 farm businesses, 35 farm businesses would have had their penalties capped under the current system. In 2022, that would have been 37. And for comparison, the total number of farms found to have breached the cross-compliance standards in 2023 was 613. So we're looking at 5.7% of those farms which have breached would have had their penalty, or did have their penalties capped in 2023 because of the current regulations.
Okay, and given the fact that this is set in the context of Lough Neagh, would you know how many of those breaches would have had an impact on Lough Neagh and the rivers associated with it?
Right. Well, of the 35 breaches, which were farms which had breaches capped, those that had breached the requirements around protection of waters was 3.
3?
Yes, of the 35.
Okay. And can I just ask then, with regards to this being reversed, will this be just in relation to pollution and incursions around Lough Neagh, or will this be for any breach, including animal tagging?
This would be for all breaches.
So this is,
yes.
Okay.
Yes, it would. That was the Minister's specific decision on that.
It's
Yes.
for all
That it would
breaches
apply across.
regardless?
Yes.
Okay. And finally, I see from the responses that you didn't receive a response from the UFU, although I do understand that they are in regular contact with you in relation to penalties and so on. Yes. But with regards to specifically, in the absence of an official response for them for this particular aspect, have you had a conversation with them?
We have, and the UFU have indicated that they're opposed to this change. But as you say, the focused consultation that we undertook after the Minister's appearance before you on the 6th of June, the UFU chose not to respond, but we have, as you say, through separate conversations with them, understood their position quite clearly on this, which is they are opposed.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's important to point out, I think that they're certainly opposed to the changes, not opposed to cross-compliance, and just to make sure that we don't have...
Chair,
I know you weren't saying that, but it's
I was
just
referring specifically to this change, to this regulation. Yes.
No problem. So, happy enough, Michelle? Yeah, okay, then...
Not really happy.
No, I know, yes, I choose my words. Yeah. Content that you've got your answer. Okay, John Blair, please.
Chair, thank you, and I'm grateful for the presentation. Can we, in the interest of the open meeting and in the interest, therefore, of openness and transparency, find out what the definition of repeated is? Is it 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 instances? Because I think that the context is quite important.
The repetition of a breach of any of the verifiable standards was on a 3-year period.
Okay.
And I think, just to add, it's important to remember that the intentionality, the intentional breaches are still in the penalty matrix as it stands, and will be in the penalty matrix going forward. The definition of intent is that a business, knowing the consequences, does or does not do what's required, and it can be argued that someone who repeats a breach of a standard constantly knows what is required because the department let them know what they've breached, what they haven't done, and what they should have done.
Okay. I'm not still clear whether repeated or constantly is 2 times or 10 times. And there may be, if there's a variation, then I accept that. And if there's a variation depending on the level of the breach or the severity of the breach, then I'm, of course, going to take that into consideration.
The repeat is more than once.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if a farmer breaches a particular standard, there's a penalty applied. If that farmer then breaches the same standard a second time, the penalty is increased. So on at the 3rd time as well. After that, we then, under this regulation, would move out of the negligent part of the matrix with penalties typically of 1, 3 and 5% into the intentional penalty element of the matrix, which can go from 15 to 100%.
Yeah. A person would have had to have breached the regulations a number of times, and,
yes,
and possibly quite a number of times before it reached that level. And I think we need to set the context. I'm asking deliberately for this reason, Chair. I mean, some of us said at the outset of the Lough Neagh crisis that every policy and every practice needs to be reviewed. So despite the claims of sometimes, it's not levelled at one sector any more than another to say that. It's doing what it says on the tin. Every practice, every policy, every sector, every person. The simple, from recreational right through to, okay, let's say it, agricultural. But, I mean, frankly, you would need to have been living in a cave for the last 2 or 3 years not to realise the importance of taking regulation of pollution and impact on Lough Neagh pretty seriously. And if anyone's in any doubt, then speak to the traders and the people who live there and the people who are trying to conduct community activities who have been so detrimentally impacted. Even if the numbers are small in this instance, then the issue of having to review practices and policies remains very relevant in this regard. And for those reasons, and without hesitation, I will be supporting that this is done, because we have to continue to strive to do better with regard to our environment, in the knowledge that reports on our water qualities in Northern Ireland are pretty poor, actually.
Can I just, before bringing Patty, I'm just going to expand on something that John said there. So we've some figures in and around, I think it was Michelle's question, in terms of the numbers of agricultural incidences and what that quantifies. John's just an interesting point about non-agricultural, non-farming compliance. What are the figures like in regard to the compliance there, and then the recorded instances of prosecution or?
I should stress, Chair, that in terms of these regulations, these only apply to farm businesses, okay. And these only apply to farm businesses which claim subsidy from the department through the basic payment or any other scheme. I don't have figures myself on breaches or pollution incidents that may have been caused by non-farming enterprises.
What are the actions then for non-farming pollutants at the department?
The recent audit report addressed that, and there are regulations in place that can be enforced by environmental groups such as NIA to prosecute depending on the severity of any pollution, both businesses and depending again on the extent of the severity of the pollution event, domestic dwellings as well. So outside of the cross-compliance regime, we also have domestic legislation that allows for that.
John, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, very quickly, I think to continue that theme, Chair, it's probably important to point out that if what we're talking about here doesn't apply to other sectors or instances, we must also accept that we are completely unaware of the existence of any other relaxations in relation to other sectors or other businesses or practices. So if there haven't been any other relaxations across the piece, as it were, probably strengthens the argument not to have a relaxation in a particular instance.
Thank you. Badly worded question by Mr. My apologies, because I could see your eyes widening there. Thank you. It's not nice
I should clarify, Chair, that this regime exists in addition to any prosecution decisions that might be taken by authorities such as NIA. That's correct.
Yeah. There's one bit that I'm genuinely can't get my head around in terms of how the bar set for our minor or significant contraventions. Could you explain to me what the bar is? And that matrix I think John was maybe alluding to. So in terms of a minor, even a repeated minor, as opposed to significant.
Our inspectorates, which are under the competent control authorities, who are experts in their own fields, have a matrix, and it's set out in legislation as well, where they report the extent, the permanence, the severity and the intent behind any breach of the verifiable standards, and that determines the level of penalty. At the minute we have low, medium and high, minor in respect of breaches other than animals, that essentially is how the impact and the resultant financial penalty, if any, is determined.
And is there any right, just so I understand at the moment, with the system at the moment and then with the proposed changes, is there any right of appeal?
Yes,
okay.
There is. So, as with any decision taken around area-based schemes, there is a right of any farm business to seek a review of decisions. And that's a two-stage process that we've had for many years, where a farm business, if they believe the decision the department has taken is wrong, can seek redress through that process.
Thank you. And Patsy.
Yeah, thanks very much. And we're getting into the territory that I wanted to get into was, first of all, the threshold, and you're explaining some of that there. It might be helpful if we got that, Chair. The threshold for what is determined to be a breach or what is likely to be a minor infringement. That's the first thing, and I'll just get my head around that. But the second thing then is repeated infringements, or sorry, repeated breaches, to get the terminology right. Are those repeated breaches of a similar category of activity, or are they accumulative breaches of different types of activities on the farm business? Where I'm going to is some of those repeated breaches of, say, environmental spills or whatever it may be. That's a breach, but it's also impinging upon the criminal. But breaches in, say, 2 or 3 different categories, to my mind, depend on what those categories are, could, again, depending on what the categories are, lead to a penalty and maybe not lead to a penalty. So I'm trying to get where's the, if you like, the critical call of those 3 breaches as to what they might be, and then at that point, do you call for a penalty or not?
The accumulation of penalties, the repetition or recurrence of penalties, is at the actual requirement. So each standard under the verifiable standards has a list of requirements which you must or must not do, and it's that specific requirement. So it's questions 1.1.1, for example. So it has to be a breach of that specific requirement within 3 years. We do have a treatise one where if we have breaches within certain areas, that we will just apply the highest on first occurrence. And there's different rules around that, but it's the actual specific requirement under each of the standards. Yeah.
So it's 3 repeated breaches of a similar issue.
Of the exact issue. Yeah.
Yeah, the same exact issue.
Yeah,
right,
exact
okay.
same standard. So we will not record breaches as being repeated if there's a breach around the protection of waters, and then the following year there's something on identification and movement of animals, etc. Those are different and are treated as separate breaches.
That's
But that brings you back then to the definition of intentional, which is knowing the consequence of doing what you should or should not be doing.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
10, Patsy?
Thanks, Chair. Yep.
Is it in scope in regard to, given the financial climate for farmers and the absolute position that they're in at the moment, has there been any discussion in terms of maybe deferring penalties or offering other ways of mitigating the impact on them? Just given it, because they're in
where a breach has occurred and a penalty is applied, the regulations require the department to seek recovery of that money as soon as possible. We will write to the business and seek repayment. We can intercept the next payment due to the business and deduct the penalty from it. Or there are circumstances where a business may approach us about a repayment plan, and we have a number of instances of that where we will agree with the farm business a way of spreading the repayment of that penalty over a number of years.
And just finally from me, is there any instances where a farm has had their payment removed completely?
Yes.
And for a determined amount of time?
No, not for a determined amount of time. It's just the financial value of the penalty applied in year is then recovered, and that may then result in the next payment due to them not being received at all because we've intercepted the entire payment.
Okay, and William, you have
just to say that I think some people doesn't fully understand the system. Already, there's farmers at 15% losing thousands of pounds fines. what you're proposing to do is revert back to tens of thousands of pounds. There's only been 2 environmental breaches, as Mr. Foy said. There's a lot of these breaches, I could explain some to you, are very, very minor. For instance, notifying cattle movements. Once you have an animal moved into your herd, you have 7 days to notify it and moved in. It is already notified by the seller, has to be notified by the buyer. If you're 8 days, there's a penalty. And sometimes you might get the permit for 4 or 5 days to the post, and I understand by the hard copy. So there's issues. One issue, the main issue, the big penalty that I had represented people on was over late notification of permits. So if you're 1 day late, you're in a penalty situation. So there's people have lost thousands of pounds. I can understand where you're coming from in environmental issues, but in minor issues, and that's the issue I have. And that's why I'm not supporting an increase.
On that, would there not be a test of reasonableness?
No, there's not.
No, but what I mean is, if you're land on the post and it's 2 or 3 days late,
no difference.
But if somebody doesn't notify the department for, say, a month or 2 months, like, you know,
the department's already notified.
No, but sorry, I mean the individual.
Yes, but then it's just confirming that animal was in there. They already know that animal was in there. It's just confirming that animal was in there.
Yes, I know.
It's only confirming that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are decisions, Chair, made really by the competent control authorities, which are the Northern Ireland Environment Agency and the Department's Veterinary Service. Without being in a position to speak for them, I do know that they do take some circumstances into account where there are mitigating circumstances involved, but it's very much on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Declan, have you anything else just at the...
Just sort of a lot of the points were picked up by Patsy and William there. I think it's important to say that there's a differentiation between minor breaches and environmental breaches. Environmental breaches are different, right? But like farmers I would represent, for example, ear tags been missing, and ear tags can be missing for a whole host of reasons. You know, so if there's an inspection and the ear tags missing once or twice at a different time, then they're going to start losing their penalties over something that that isn't an environmental impact. So I just think that you don't want to, we obviously can't stress the importance of cross compliance, but it's the environmental impact is vital breaches, but it's the minor stuff that you highlighted, and ear tags is something that I would hear a lot, for example. And the ear tags can be knocked off in the hustle bustle of cattle moving around the place,
Okay, members, if you're content, thank you very much for the briefing this morning. So members, do you want to have a discussion on that? What we have to do then is to make a decision as to whether we support the department in proceeding to make the SR of the direct payments to Farmers Cross Compliance Revocation Regulations 2024. So are members content that the department do that, or will they be seeking? Okay, I'm imagining in listening to the conversation that we're not going to have a consensus in this, so I'm going to have to take a vote on the matter, if that's okay. So I'll read it as I would in terms of, so I'm looking for the votes that would agree that the department proceed to make the SR, the direct payments to farmer regulations under the resolution as prescribed. Anybody supporting it?
Yep.
One?
On the basis that there's no separation from environment and minor, it's regrettable that might be in some instances. There's a focus here on the word repeated, so first-time offenders will not be penalised, and if there's no separation from the environment in the context of our waterways and Loughlin in particular, then absolutely no way could I not support it.
The farmers are already fined, they're already fined 15%. It's not that they're not fined, they've already been fined, as it stands.
Anya, did you want to come in there? I see your camera on.
Well, I suppose from my point of view, Chair, on this one, I would be opposing it for a lot of the reasons that Declan and William already set out.
Okay. Okay, guys. John, so for the record, John Blair is supporting. I imagine if I can have a show of hands from members even that would be not supporting it. Is that Declan, Anya, Nicola, Patsy? Okay, well then that's pretty much. Okay, so guys, we will report that to the department in regards to the committee's response to that, and that'll we'll wait the department's response to our response. We think we know the next step that moves us into in regard to this SL1. Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item 8, members, is the SL1 on the Marine Licensing Application Fees Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. So members, I refer you to pages 87 to 135 in the pack regarding SL1, the Marine Licensing Application Fees Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. The Department intends to make this SR to revise the structure of the fee tables set out in the Marine Licensing Application Fee Regulations 2011 and the amounts charged for an application for a marine licence. DAERA consulted on the proposals to revise marine licensing fees from the 9th of July to the 3rd of September, and the policy objectives is to deliver a more efficient and equitable marine licensing system based on the principle that users should pay for the service that they receive. The rule will be laid before the Assembly and is subject to negative resolution procedure, and it's anticipated that it will come into operation on the 1st of January 2025. So hopefully in a minute or two we will have our witnesses. Okay, thank you so much. Welcome to the committee. I'm going to offer you a chance shortly to brief the committee. Now, I'm going to have to get past my vanity stage because I'm struggling to see your names here. So we have Stephanie, we have Susan, we have Colin, and we have Kelly. I can't make out the surnames, but they're in the pack here. Okay, guys. So I appreciate your time, and please feel free to brief the committee.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide you with the short briefing on the SL1 for the Marine Licensing Application Fees Amendment Regulations 2024. Most of the details in the SL1, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I have colleagues here from policy and also from marine licensing who are able to answer any technical questions that you might have. It's a fairly straightforward statutory rule which amends fee tables and earlier regulations which were made under the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009. Marine licensing fees are proportionate and they're based on the size or the estimated cost of a project, and the 2024 regulations retain this model. Just some background on marine licensing. Through marine licensing, DAERA supports sustainable development in the Northern Ireland and Shore region, which is 0 to 12 nautical miles from the coast. Examples of the activities which need a marine licence include the construction of jetties, extensions to marinas and coastal infrastructure. Other activities that you would generally associate with the seas, such as fishing, do not require a marine licence because they're regulated elsewhere. There's increasing interest in the use of the Northern Ireland Marine Area for projects such as renewable energy and other projects which combine creating economic opportunity with the ability to tackle climate change and reduce greenhouse gases. It's important, therefore, that we deliver an effective and properly resourced marine licensing system, and that'll help support the achievement of executive policies like the target to achieve 1 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2030. This SR is part of a project to deliver a more equitable and efficient marine licensing system. It complements some efficiencies that have already been introduced recently to the system, such as new information which is available via forms on our website, some story maps to help applicants, and better linkages to the DAERA map viewer. Some background on the statutory rule. The draft 2024 fee regulations consist mainly of fee tables. Generally speaking, fees are increasing by 142% on 23-24 levels, or 128% on 24-25 fees. An exception is the fee for large renewable projects. this is based on the estimated cost of the staff time spent determining an application. The draft SR also makes provision for the addition of 3 new bands for construction licence fees. 2 of the bands are for small licences. These are small value, low risk activities which have little impact on the marine environment, include activities such as placing markers, which will be there for less than 24 hours, or repairing header walls. The fees for these types of licences would be £60 and £200 respectively, and that represents a fairly significant saving of £635 or £495 on current fees. We are also proposing to add a new fee band for large construction projects with an estimated value of 50 million plus. This is to take account of inflationary pressures on the construction industry. So you're probably wondering, where did this 142% come from? We're aware of our responsibilities under managing public money, NI, to charge for services at cost. So we looked at the cost of providing marine licensing services in 23-24 financial year. This is the last full year of income that we have, and it was also the first year where applications for our licences returned to pre-COVID levels. Previous research had suggested that 40% of staff time was spent determining applications. Some other services provided by staff include providing pre-application advice, which we don't currently have the power to charge for, and monitoring compliance with conditions of licences. So 40% of the cost of providing the service was compared with income from application fees and used to calculate that fees needed to increase by 141.95% to fully recover the cost of the service. We held an 8-week public consultation on this, which closed on the 3rd of September. 17 responses to the consultation were received, including 6 from government departments and agencies in the UK and in Ireland. 8 or 9 respondents answered the questions that were posed in the consultation in the order they were proposed, and it was this fairly low response rate meant that each response had a fairly high impact on the consultation statistics. You know, for some questions, as few as 5 responses were received, so each response was 20% of the total. The responses were mixed. Some people acknowledged that DAERA had to comply with the requirements of managing public money, NI, while others were less positive. Something not captured in the response to consultation is that a large part of our stakeholder base didn't respond to the consultation. Now, we did hold 3 stakeholder workshops, 1 as we were developing the policy and 2 during the consultation. The fact that people didn't respond to the consultation or raise any issues could suggest tacit approval to the proposed increases. We considered all the responses carefully, and this is reflected in the synopsis of responses, which is part of your briefing pack. That brings me to the end of this briefing. Thank you very much for listening, and my colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the report, and thank you for that was really interesting, actually. Michelle, you're up first, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, and thank you very much for your presentation. Can you just ask why DAERA didn't wait for the financial provisions bill to come forward?
Yeah, so these ones here are what this SL1 is allowing us to move initially on the things that we can make regulations under the existing amendment regulations. We don't need the new primary powers for. In the public consultation, there was things that we can't yet charge for, so that's like pre-application fees and other marine licensing services. We need the primary powers to charge for that. So we are also, in the consultation summary report, working with the Department of Finance and getting agreement from DEFRA at the moment because of the, it links into things that are responsibility of the Secretary of State, because we'll be amending the Marine and Coastal Access Act. So that will happen at a later stage. So what you'll be looking at is in the next stage, so later on next year, we will do a more fundamental review of marine licences, fees, and say, right, we'll deal with both pre-application fees, application fees, and also any post-consent fees, but they're not covered in this. So this is just amending what we have powers for. That's the approach.
That's fine. Obviously, some of the respondents suggested about the definition of a renewable project probably needed clarification, because some may then be sort of fees may be wrongly applied to them. Is there work going on with regards to that?
Yeah, there's a guidance document being produced which will explain what a marine renewables project is. Largely what has been targeted at and what we're looking at is offshore wind, but it's what is within the envelope of offshore wind. Offshore wind also has things like the cables, the connections, those all coming ashore. We want to make sure it's well defined exactly what is an offshore wind or what is an offshore renewable energy project, and that will be outlined in the guidance document, so that all associated activities are captured and the appropriate fee is therefore charged. I suppose the natural question from those who will have to pay the additional fee, because 142% is quite a considerable jump, will be, have you looked at efficiencies within your own division to try to offset some of that? So that's... Ellie, do you want to...
Yes, we put in place a number of measures actually to ensure that we're more efficient and more effective in the work that we do. So we're looking at introducing a new planning portal for marine licensing. So we currently don't have any IT system. So we hope to bring that forward in April 25, which will allow the applicants to make the application through the system. We've also introduced a hierarchy of development, so we can take a proportionate approach to those bigger, large-scale applications as well. We have set out some operating principles, which sets out the expectations from both our side and the applicant side, to ensure things are more streamlined. So we set out a number of, modernisation measures to help us be more effective and more efficient. And all of those measures should be in place by April.
And have those been costed?
Maybe not changing.
They have been introduced as part of better practice. Most of them, the costing of the portal system is being delivered by DSD. So it's an internal system that's being delivered. And in terms of we will have to employ more staff, but this increase in fees helps us to do that. We need, as you would imagine, well-qualified staff to deal with these complex applications, and we have started that recruitment exercise.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions based on around an interest now in this table of charges that are part of the pack today. So I know you'd spoken a lot about sort of the creation of infrastructure and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff in there in the table about dredging. And so dredging, mineral extraction licence, and the marine renewable energy. So I have a wee question on each of those, if that's okay. In terms of the dredging piece, this is more goes into the technical. What is the state of dredging at the moment? Who's it going to impact? Were involved in the discussion in regard to that? A bit more of an explanation, if you don't mind, around the mineral extraction licence and again who that impacts on, and if it's attached to the quotas. So there's just one fee there; it's a set fee. It doesn't seem to be measured against any quantum of extraction. And then the marine renewable energy licence. So I'm just wondering, is that completely new? And in regards to other regions, or is that a competitive level that that's set at in terms of trying to secure renewable, affordable energy for Northern Ireland? And does that put us in does that equate to any other regions? If that's okay, thank you.
I'll start with the dredging. So the dredging and the sea disposal licence usually come together. For dredging, it's usually within major ports, and that would fall under their harbour order. So we wouldn't charge that would be an exemption. We would charge then for the sea disposal if that material is suitable for disposal at sea. So it's the big ports, and there is obviously some smaller ports, so Cushendon, but they would be, again, a smaller band. And again, it's likely to be the sea disposal or the beach nourishment, but that would be for that. Minerals licences, we've never had one.
Okay.
So there has never been one. So I can't tell you who that would affect. But luckily we don't have one of those. And your third one was the offshore renewables. So the offshore renewable one, so that's a new fee structure, and we do work with the UK regulators to see how that was compiled. We are very competitive. Our licence is for just the marine licence. You also then need to get a planning licence on top of that, or a DFI licence. And the main aim of that one is if you're looking at 1 gigawatt or more, is the higher increase. So obviously that's big development that's going to have impacts to the environment, and there will be cost recovery and proportionate for that type of development.
Is that then, so in terms of the licence fees here for Northern Ireland, vis-a-vis Republic, Scotland, England, Wales and stuff, is it competitive? Does it, in terms of just that comparison?
Not that easy to compare it directly, because different administrations have different structures. For instance, England and Wales tend to use like an hourly rate, so people are charged for the amount of time that is actually spent determining the application. Comparing our fees to Scotland, our renewable fees are pretty competitive compared to Scotland.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to the dredging one, if you don't mind, because this week we had an adjournment debate with the fishers from Ardglass, and I was reading in my papers that some of the challenges they've faced in the past in terms of land and fish is the depth of the water, obviously, and some of the boats were... So obviously dredging is important for our fisher ports, and they're facing huge pressures in and around work visas and all of those things. Does this have an indirect impact? So in terms of the scale of charges there, for this piece, for the dredging, is there...
So Ardglass Harbour is part of NIFA, and they have got a harbour order, so they can dredge under their harbour order at no cost for a marine licence. It's the sea disposal aspect of if they want to dispose of that at sea, and it's deemed it can be disposed of sea. There is a better practitioner paper which they have to follow to say why it's obviously been disposed at sea, because it's not... Sometimes we don't want that disposed at sea, it can be used elsewhere. So NIFAs will be impacted by the sea disposal aspect if they wish for that to go to sea disposal and not used elsewhere, their materials.
You're a silt.
Literally.
No, thank you. No, that's good, because it's the law of unintended consequences that I want to make sure that we if we get the opportunity in another discussion, because it's just, when we throw pebble in somewhere, there's a ripple somewhere else and impacts on. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks all of you for being here. Good to see you. I fully get the cost recovery piece and the variations there might naturally be between one region and another, and I'm glad to hear that at least in some respects it compares favourably with some of the other regions. But what I need to know is it marine only, sea only, or does it apply to inland waters also? For example, the rivers that flow to Lough Neagh, there are issues with dredging around the mouths of some of those. Some of the people, depending on a better outcome there, for example, Lough Neagh Rescue, pretty vital local service, but not cash rich by any means, would be impacted by this. Does it apply there, or purely seaports and seas?
So marine licensing is for marine high water and below, so it won't impact Lough Neagh. No, nothing inland. Anything that has the sole infrastructure. So that would be the only way we build up the Lough Foyle, but not Lough Neagh.
Double check. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Members content?
Yep.
Thank you so much. That was very informative. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, members. Okay, we've now heard from the department. Are you agreed that the department proceeds to make the SR, the Marine Licence and Application Fees Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2024? Yep, content? Thank you, members. What I'm going to suggest, with your indulgence, we take a comfort break at this moment, because the next items we're going to take together, which will be a bit of a debate, if you don't mind. So we will go out of committee for about 5 minutes, if you want to.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
Okay, members, we're now moving on to agenda item 9 and 10, which are the proposed regulations stemming from the Climate Change Act, Northern Ireland 2022. We have departmental officials here to brief us on both sets of proposed regulations. We have Jane Corduroy, Director of Climate Change and Green Growth Policy Division. We have Anthony Courtney from the Environmental Policy Division Climate Change Branch. We have Phil Elliott, Environmental Policy Division, Brexit Environment and EU ETS Team, Senior Scientific Officer. Wow, I'll have to shorten that a bit. We have Ian Fleming, Environmental Policy Division, Climate Change Branch. And what we're going to do here, members, is do both of the briefings if the witnesses are content with that. And then we'll move to members at the end for questions. And okay, happy enough? Okay, thank you very much. So, say before the officials do start, and for the record, I'm going to run through a brief overview of what the regulations cover. Okay, so that is it. The first one is SL1, the Climate Change Carbon Budgets 2023 to 2037, Regulations 2024. Refer you to pages 136 to 199 of the pack, members, for the papers regarding the SL1, the Climate Change Carbon Budgets 23 to 27 regulations. The Department intends to make this SR under powers conferred on it by Section 23 of the Climate Change Act, Northern Ireland 2022, to set the first 3 carbon budgets covering the periods 23 to 27, 28 to 32 and 23 to 37. The first carbon budget to be set at a level that has a 33% average annual reduction in emissions against the baseline. The second to be set at a level that has a 48% average annual reduction in emissions against the baseline. And the third to be set at a level that has a 62% average annual reduction in emissions against the baseline. The SR would be led before the Assembly under the draft affirmative resolution procedure, and it's anticipated that it will come into operation on the day after the day in which it's made. The SR's cross-cutting and the executive approval was secured on the 21st of November. The second SL is the Climate Change 2040 Emissions Target Regulations 24. And members, I'm going to refer you to pages 201 to 262 in your pack regarding that SL1. DAERA proposed to make this SR under powers conferred on it by Sections 5.2 of the Climate Change Act Northern Ireland 2022 to set a 2040 emissions reduction target of 77%. The SR will be laid before the Assembly under the draft affirmative resolution procedure, and it is anticipated that it will come into operation on the day after the day in which it was made. The rule is cross-cutting, and the executive approval was secured on the 21st of November for that SR. So I now invite the officials to brief the committee on both SRs. Thank you so much.
Very much. You've covered quite a lot of what I was going to say there, so hopefully that's perfect. So thank you very much for the opportunity to brief you on the 2 regulations as listed just earlier. As I said, Phil and Anthony lead on the carbon budgets and interim targets, and also the Just Transition Commission, and Phil leads on evidence and analysis in support of climate change, so he's for our technical science related questions. It's important, first of all, to set out that these regulations are being brought forward to deliver on statutory requirements placed on DAERA in the Climate Change Act, Northern Ireland 2022. And as you know, the Act sets a legal target for us to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, which is in keeping with similar net zero targets at UK level, EU level, but which have also been legislated for in Scotland, in Wales and in Ireland. Section 23 of the Act requires DAERA to make regulations that set carbon budgets, and a carbon budget provides a limit on the maximum amount of greenhouse gas emissions permitted within a 5-year period. Carbon budgets are a key mechanism for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to put us on track towards meeting our 2030, 2040 and 2050 statutory targets in a planned and gradual way. It is part of the process to allow us to have a fair transition to a lower carbon society. The first 3 carbon budget periods are 2023 to 27, 2028 to 32 and 2033 to 37. And the Act requires the carbon budget to be set at a level which is consistent in meeting the targets in the Act. Carbon budgets will be set at a Northern Ireland level rather than a sectoral or departmental level. However, it is the cumulative impact of reductions in emissions across each sector that will enable a carbon budget to be met. All departments are required under the Act to ensure that a carbon budget is achieved. And the delivery vehicle for achieving this is through the development and implementation of a series of 5 yearly climate action plans. and the DAERA Minister will be bringing the first Climate Action Plan for Carbon Budget 1 to the Executive and Assembly soon. These regulations before you today are not about the Climate Action Plan. They are solely to set the gradual and phased trajectory for Northern Ireland to meet our legislated climate targets. Turning to the targets, the current 2030 target in the Act is for net emissions to be at least 48% lower than the baseline. And the current emissions reduction target for 2040 requires our net emissions account to be in line with the target for the year 2050. As required by the Act, advice was sought from the UK Climate Change Committee on what they would recommend as being appropriate emissions reduction targets and appropriate emissions limits for each of the first 3 carbon budgets. The CCC provided recommendations and published their advice in a report titled The Path to Net Zero for Northern Ireland in March 2023. CCC recommended that the emissions reduction targets for 2030 should remain as a reduction of at least 48% against the baseline, and that's the current target in the Act. So in line with CCC advice, the Department is not proposing to amend the 2030 target. The CCC also recommended that the emissions reduction target for 2040 should be at least 77% lower than the baseline. In terms of carbon budgets, the CCC recommendations is the first carbon budget, as you said earlier, 33%, the second carbon budget at 48%, and the third carbon budget at 62%. The CCC have recommended that we use percentage figures as opposed to an actual figure of megatons, as this allows the budget and the targets to be more responsive to scientific advancements that may make changes to the baseline. In addition to seeking the advice from the CCC, and as required by the Act, the Department also gave consideration to the advice of Ireland's Climate Change Advisory Council and the advice of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The carbon budget regulations were required to be set before the end of 2023. However, that was not possible in the absence of an assembly. However, during this time, DAERA did continue to progress policy work, and between June and October last year, we ran a 16-week public consultation in compliance with the legislation on the targets and the carbon budgets. And we took that opportunity to also consult on the illustrative pathways across each sector to ensure that consultees could get an idea of what those proposed reductions might look like across each of the different sectors. It was an incredibly positive consultation, really strong engagement. We received 235 written responses. The first 5 questions sought views on whether DAERA should follow the advice of the CCC when setting the 2030 and 2040 targets and the first 3 carbon budgets, and the 6th question sought views if DAERA should follow any future updated advice from the Climate Change Committee. Across all of these questions, there was strong support from between 70 to 78% of respondents for setting the targets and the budgets in line with the CCC recommendations and to continue to follow any future advice. During the consultation, DAERA led on a series of 21 workshops in person and online, which were attended by over 700 people. This included 3 workshops which were targeted specifically at young people. The feedback from the engagement sessions was similar to that which came through the formal consultation responses, with the vast majority of saying that DAERA should trust the science and follow the expert advice provided by the CCC. In April, committee was provided with the 2 response documents that summarise the outcome of the consultation and the engagement sessions. Alongside the 2 sets of regulations, we've provided you with a copy of the regulatory impact assessments, which provide an assessment of the estimated associated costs. The analysis has been compiled using detailed data sets based on CCC advice, pathways together with the application of DESNZ's carbon values, that's the Department of Energy, Security Net Zero, using HM Treasury Green Book guidance to determine the appropriate carbon value in relation to the emissions which will be saved if the carbon budgets are achieved. Carbon values aim to calculate the societal value of carbon emissions and represent a monetary value placed on 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent. The RIA and the SL1 have provided more detailed breakdown on the estimated costs on the carbon values using a central series projection and the net cost benefit for each of the 3 carbon budget periods. These figures do not include all of the benefits of climate action, such as improved air quality, less noise, healthier diets and more active lifestyles, benefits to the environment, to biodiversity, or the potential significant economic and employment opportunities, as well as energy security. The costs and benefits outlined are notional costs and benefits to the economy here as a whole. They do not represent solely the costs to government. All departments here will need to develop and implement proposals and policies to meet emissions reduction targets set out in the Act and ensure carbon budgets are not exceeded. Much of the actual detail on costs, benefits and impacts for all departments, including for DAERA, will be determined by the firm proposals and the policies that are brought forward. and these will be individually assessed and costed as part of the Climate Action Plan development process. And it is for the Executive, in consultation with stakeholders, to consider the options and determine the pathway it wishes to take to meet the budgets and the targets in the Act. The true costs and the benefits cannot be fully ascertained until there is greater clarity on the agreed pathway for each carbon budget period and those policies which will actually be implemented. There are therefore at this stage limitations in terms of the estimated costs and of all of the benefits outlined as full details and robust costings are meant to be and are best achieved via the process involved in the development of cross-governmental climate action plans. It's envisaged the first draft climate action plan will be finalised and issued for consultation early in 2025, and the committee will be provided with briefing on this plan prior to the 16-week public consultation which is required under the Act. In addition to the RIA, we also undertake equality screening, a children's rights impact assessment and a rural needs impact assessment, which we shared with you. Each of the assessments shows that there will be societal benefits from future policies that departments develop and implement to reduce emissions. We know that many carbon reduction policies, such as adopting cleaner energy sources, change in travel practice, shopping local and improving the energy efficiency of homes and buildings, reduces bills, as well as providing environmental, health and societal benefits for all of the population. It is also clear that strong climate environmental credentials are essential if we are to attract inward investment, maximise economic opportunities and ensure that we can compete on an international scale. There are many opportunities of decarbonisation and green growth. Even just yesterday, we saw PwC publish their Green Jobs Barometer, which shows the proportion of green jobs advertised here has doubled, and there are clear opportunities for further growth. The regulations, as I said earlier, do not specify what each sector is required to deliver. Rather, they set the targets for the overall emissions for this region. It's also important to note that even in the absence of carbon budgets and targets, that all departments are required to meet the legislative targets that are in the Act. The carbon budgets and interim targets simply provide the trajectory to ensure the action we take is gradual and fair and mitigates against having to take much more radical action over shorter periods, which would result in significantly higher additional cost for mitigation, for adaptation and missing out on the economic and employment opportunities that we know are available now. Bringing forward these regulations is a statutory duty. The legislative deadline for making the carbon budget regulations has now passed, and so this duty has been breached. It's therefore important that the regulations continue to progress so that the Department can meet its statutory duties under the Act. The next stage in the process is to lay both sets of regulations in the Assembly under the draft affirmative procedure for their debate and approval as soon as possible. And I think our ideal scenario would be before Christmas recess if we could do that. But I want to take time to thank the committee and the clerk today for allowing us to come to committee at such short notice and for dealing with the policy and the draft regulations together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, for providing the information and for speaking to us today. I'm just going to ask a wee question at the start and then I'm going to open it out. Looking at the impact assessments, last week the committee was luckily dealing with rural support groups, and there's a rural impact assessment. The read across seem to be quite similar for both of the SRs in regard to that, so it's pointing to the benefits. But were there any significant challenges that would be faced in the rural networks, not specifically on the farming and agriculture community, but right across the Section 75 community groups there? Because what we recognised last week was there were challenges to people who live rurally in regard to distances to hospitals, to schools, to even social interactions and stuff. And how do we achieve that balance in terms of the challenges that are faced for us to achieve the objectives?
Well, I think that the rural needs impact assessment, so it provides some detail on that. Now, as Jane's alluded to, the actual impacts will depend on the policies and proposals that are implemented, but it does allude to the fact that in terms of people living in rural areas, there are particular challenges. So if you think about some of the more high-profile emitting sectors, transport, energy, agriculture, when you think about transport, there's particular challenges in the rural community in terms of there's not as much access to public transport. So that will be something that has to be taken into account in the development of the relevant policies and proposals at a transport sector level to try and reduce emissions from the transport sector. And similarly with energy, we know that in our rural communities that oil is very prevalent in terms of the energy source. So again, it's about trying to identify those issues in policy development at a sectoral level and build in the relevant mitigation. And the Act does include requirements around that in terms of just transition, which specifically identifies that the particular needs of a rural community need to be taken into account in the development of policies.
Because I think one of the things that came out last week was the impact of poverty, for instance, in the rural context as opposed to the urban, where some of the impacts will be more. One of the, and this, I'm going to bring in Nicola shortly, and I'll maybe come back again. One of the tables now, which call us all and point us to the need for action, is that the table set out for the greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, is Northern Ireland is certainly regionally bottom of the table in that regard. Would you like to speak to that? Maybe not.
I think the stats are the stats. So in terms of the UK, Northern Ireland is bottom of the table. In terms of our emissions profile, we're ahead of Ireland in terms of where we're at with emissions, but we are behind other parts of the UK. But we are where we are. I suppose the key thing at the moment is we have the Act, we have a driver now to try and improve things. Setting the carbon budgets, bringing forward the climate action plan, they're going to be key mechanisms to try and bring us further forward. And we have confidence that we can do that, but we certainly recognise that we have particular challenges and that we need to get going with this because we are behind other parts of the UK.
Just in terms of what you had mentioned about like rural poverty, I mean certainly some of the carbon reduction policies that you would envisage taken forward are like insulating, improving fabric of buildings, moving to heat pumps. And the CCC have told us that west of the band, so many people are on oil that you could just bypass gas and go straight to that. And that, I mean, heat pumps are 3 times cheaper to run than traditional fossil fuel heating systems. So you would be, if that's the policy trajectory that comes out of the CAP, that will definitely impact on poverty and actually improve poverty level, or address poverty levels, because people will have more money in their pockets because their heating bills will be reduced, which is a huge problem.
I'm glad you actually touched on the heat pump, because obviously the mindset is oil and gas, but actually there are other technologies that are ramping up in terms of their availability and the cost implications. I'm going to come back with a few other questions at the end. I think that Nicola, you...
Thank you, Chair, and thank you folks for your attendance here today. And thank you, Robbie, for raising that there about the Rural Needs Act. And we did a really powerful meeting last week with Rural Community Network, and it is important that their voices are heard across all these things. So I appreciate Jane your comments there about how we can improve the heating within homes in rural areas. I just want to ask you first of all, so these regulations, these budgets that have been brought forward, can you confirm they are in line with what was in the Climate Change Act? It was already set out in those for the targets of 2030 and 2040, those interim targets. These are in line with those?
Our budgets, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we're all know with it, okay. And when I know you've got a financial summary there involving the cost with setting the carbon budgets, and you touched upon this as well, but maybe you could go into some more detail about the potential economic benefits of setting these budgets and meeting the carbon budgets, and the benefit for climate action. You mentioned there improved air quality and that too, but also about supporting our industries and improved employment opportunities as well.
We know that countries that are pushing ahead with strong targets are seeing a far greater increase in green jobs, and employment. And I mean, there's certainly opportunities in terms of, you said, new technologies like heat pumps, EVs, and stuff, in terms of employment. But in terms of the economic benefits, I think there's 139 countries have similar net zero targets to us, and that's 90% of GDP. So that is the global market that we're trying to make sure that Northern Ireland is part of. Alongside other countries. I don't know if you want to say more about the economic benefits. There's economic benefits on an individual basis in terms of some of the carbon reduction policies directly impact giving more money back to people in terms of their heating and their transport. But again, it will be whichever policies that the departments decide to put in the climate action plan, and they will be assessed in the same way on regulatory impact assessment and poverty. And there's really strong elements of the legislation in terms of the just transition and the additional requirements. Like there's lots and lots of what would you call safety nets to make sure that those policies and proposals are fair and just and actually have a potentially positive impact on poverty. Do you just want to say more about the benefits?
I think probably going back to the Chair's question about the situation in other parts of the UK, I think an important thing here is that the rest of the UK and Ireland have similar targets, if not more ambitious, and some of them are ahead of us. So we don't want to be in a situation where our businesses and our sectors are lagging behind them. We want to provide them with the basis to compete. with other parts of the UK and Ireland, and I think what we're proposing through the carbon budgets and the targets will help in that regard. But obviously we need to have the right plans behind that, and that's the next stage in the process. In terms of the wider climate action benefits, again, it comes back to some things that we've talked about, but when you think of, there could be massive health benefits. Some of the things that we need to do in terms of climate action around making homes more energy efficient, more active travel, all of those things will have massive health benefits. That has financial consequences as well. It can be difficult to model them, and it's something we need to get better at in terms of modelling the holistic benefits, but it's clear from all the literature when you look at it that there's a wide range of co-benefits that can be delivered if we do this in the right way. And by the right way, I mean if we take forward action in the way that is envisaged under the Act, in terms of building in the just transition elements and making sure that we're trying to address where there may be impacts that need to be mitigated, where we're trying to address and make sure that particular sectors and groups are brought along with us and are provided with more support as part of the transition. So there's certainly a wide range of benefits that can be realised, and we're confident that with our climate action plan process we can do that.
The UK impact assessment, which covers periods similar to ours for the first 3 carbon budgets, shows a 266 billion net present value benefit over that period across the UK.
Huge then. Okay.
Yeah.
And Anthony, back to your point, I think that's very important. That would take a lot of pressure off the health service with different things that got there if we can get that in. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just before bringing John in, the base year was 2020, is that correct?
No.
For the figures?
The figures?
Yeah.
And the percentage, the ambition of the percentage is based on that baseline. It's not based on the year before, it's based on the baseline, isn't that right? So the 33% reduction, the 48 and the 70, it's based on the baseline of 2020.
The 2020 is just for the figures in the RAA, so that's the baseline. In terms of the actual percentage reductions, the baseline is 1990.
Okay.
So
1990, okay.
Yeah, in some cases 1995 or some of the gases, but again that's standard across the UK and Ireland in terms of that approach.
It's the Kyoto Protocol. It's like an international standard of what the baseline is. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, John. You're up.
Chair, yeah, thank you, and thank you also for raising the issue of Northern Ireland lagging behind. We have to be realistic about this and look to what we can do in relation to catching up with other parts of the UK. So, on the basis of that, to be more positive, look into the future, I want to ask 2 questions. First of all, it was referenced during the presentation there, and thanks for the presentation, that the targets are not sectoral specific, but they're general for Northern Ireland. Now, some of us have said for some time now that is helpful in relation to this committee for the agriculture sector in particular, and the agri-food sector, because the gains that can be made perhaps more quickly in transport or energy can be of benefit then across the range of sectors. I'd like to hear a bit more about if there's any evidence of that coming forward. For example, switching to electric buses is a very quick and direct, albeit with a cost, but a quick and direct benefit to the transport sector. Green energy impacting the energy sector, an obvious and perhaps more swift benefit as well. So I'm keen to know if there's evidence of that starting to happen. And then the second one is around the legal responsibilities in relation to the climate bill. It's a bill that was passed unanimously by this Assembly, brought forward by the previous Minister, and passed unanimously by all parties in this Assembly. From the Department's point of view, where do we sit in terms of legal targets and legal responsibilities if we don't keep this moving at this stage? And what extra burden and extra costs might that bring to the civil servants who are trying to handle this?
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's set at a Northern Ireland level, so it's up to the Executive and the Assembly where we achieve our carbon reductions. And what you can find is that, and I mean, this has happened in other regions, Scotland, Wales, where some sectors are pushing ahead. Do you know, many of you were at the debate on ETS on Tuesday. Do you know, so there are some sectors, you know, in industry and aviation, heavy sectors that are pushing ahead with decarbonisation, and certainly in transport. I mean, there's I don't want to name the various companies, but you know, some of them are doing amazing jobs, you know, and they're going to be at net zero, you know, by 2030. I know we have a lot of contact with business in the community, and there are many businesses that are signed up to 50%, even 100% reductions in net zero. So they're pushing ahead, and you can see that in the business community because they want clarity on this, and they're pushing ahead with that. And you can see that as well in communities and lots of community activities. In terms of sectors, I think transport would be a big one. with big gains. Now, it has shown an increase in greenhouse gases recently, but there is things that there are answers to all of these problems. Do you know, there are things that transport can do. We know there are things that housing can do. We know there are solutions, and because we're a wee bit behind, we can learn from the solutions in other places and what's worked well.
Yeah, and I think, all of that's been explored through the development of the Climate Action Plan process, which is obviously very much cross-cutting. So all departments are involved in that, and all the sectors are involved. So they're looking at that at the moment in terms of what sectors are doing and what sectors can do over particular periods. So there will be that degree of some sectors will be able to go further quicker than others, and other sectors face particular challenges. I suppose going back to your question about the legal responsibilities, I mean, the Act's clear. We have legal responsibilities to set these carbon budgets. We haven't done that yet. The Department is facing a legal challenge on that. And while I can't get into the details of that, that's certainly, alongside the fact that we haven't met our statutory responsibilities, that's certainly a big driver as to why we need to do this. And we also need to do it thinking beyond the legal responsibilities. I think it gives clarity for sectors, for other departments, and for the wider business communities, etc. If they know what our targets are and what our carbon budgets are over certain periods, it gives them the clarity and confidence probably to invest and to plan on that basis.
Thank you both.
Thank you, John. Patsy?
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for your time. I was just listening very carefully because last week we had a briefing from the rural community sector, and those of us that live and represent rural areas, we know that the pressures are under on a wide range of factors. So I'm intrigued by the Rural Needs Act to take account. Now, I don't expect you to give me full explicit details today, but I would anticipate there's quite a bit of take account. Could be a tick box exercise and say we've looked at a few fields or we've looked at a few villages, or take account could be extensive and have policy impact and implications down the line. Now, where I'm going is with that, we know the pressures that are on our rural areas, specifically with the Climate Change Act and legislation. That's why just transition was factored in. So, at what point are we going to actually see, because this has to be a parallel track, you have to be able to, yes, devise and implement the legislation, but at the same time support and incentivise people to get along with it, and in fact maybe come up with ideas themselves. That's why just transition was put in there to facilitate change and support change. So with the legislation, I'm anxious to hear just what time frame you have for just transition support measures as well, especially for those rural areas.
Okay, so the Rural Needs Impact Assessment have been undertaken on both sets of regulations. Rural Needs Impact Assessment will also be taken on the Climate Action Plan, and it will be, because it's a law, it will be required to be taken by every department on their policies and proposals that they're proposing to take forward. We have done quite detailed Rural Needs Impact Assessment, and we would be committed to continuing to do that. In terms of bringing the sectors along with us, I mean, you'll have heard from other people from our department. There's some really incredible innovation happening in the agriculture sector and the rural sector in terms of carbon reduction, and that is one of the things that we consulted on in terms of an alternative pathway to what the CCC had proposed in the consultation document. So the solution to how we reduce greenhouse gases in agriculture and rural communities is going to have to be designed with agriculture and the rural communities, with the department. And it's worth saying, I don't know if one of you wants to say about the Just Transition Fund for Agriculture, but I can talk about the Just Transition Commission. We launched that consultation on the 11th. It's a really important body. We looked at how that's been delivered in Scotland, and we've had very close contact with our counterparts in the south on how they're taking forward their Just Transition Commission. Ours will be on a statutory basis. And we're going out to say, have we included the right number of sectors? Is this the right sort of body? How often? All of those things to move as quickly as possible with that. Now we have various engagement meetings set up with, I think, nearly all of the 7 sectors that are listed. We're just trying to get dates and diaries, but we've also reached out to the Rural Community Network kind of stakeholder group within our own department, and also the Young Farmers Clubs Ulster, because we want to hear young people's voices in this as well, because they're one of the key groups that are going to be most impacted by how well we do with reducing our carbon emissions.
Yeah, and I think, as you're aware, Patsy, in the Act itself, in terms of just transition, those responsibilities are placed on all departments. So all departments in developing their policies and proposals, they need to be looking at the requirements, at the principle and related objectives. and they're also required to set out evidence in the Climate Action Plan as to how they're complying with that. So they have to be material considerations when departments are developing their policies, because certainly there's policies that will be developed within DAERA where there's particular things that we need to think about, but on energy and transport, which sits with other departments, there's massive rural community issues there that need to be taken into account. So there's an onus of responsibility in those departments to be ensuring that they are taking those issues into account and trying to provide relevant mitigation.
One final question. Who should be the driver for this? Because look, everybody could be in their own silos doing their own thing and maybe not doing their own thing, or maybe not doing it so well. So who should be the driver for this to ensure that that's happening? And secondly then, who should be the body or department that's overseeing it to make sure it's meeting certain standards and that people aren't disadvantaged?
Under the Act, DAERA leads in terms of bringing forward the Climate Action Plan, but the particular responsibilities around just transition are equally put on all departments. I mean, in some senses, it should be committees and maybe the Assembly and stakeholders that hold departments to account in terms of looking at what's in climate action plans. Does that do enough? Is that compliant with what the legislation requires? Does it need to go further? So there's a degree of departments need to own their own responsibilities in this regard, but stakeholders, committees and other people need to, I suppose, be there to challenge and ensure that the right thing is being done with regard to the specific elements that you're talking about.
My point is, who's to coordinate it all? In other words, one department might think it's doing well enough, and it could be held to account by a committee that thinks it's doing well enough. But in regard to how it's performing, as opposed to another department, it might just be mediocre.
I think once the Just Transition Commission is established, like one of their roles is an oversight role in just transition elements of the Act. So they'll be reviewing climate action plans, they'll be reviewing policies and proposals within that to ensure that just transition elements have been applied correctly and that is fairly. And if I'm looking at all departments, I think that's an oversight from them all, because they'll be looking at everything generally and take account to your point. They might say, for example, looking at Department 1 and they say, no, they're not doing as well as what Department 2 is. You're going to have to give more regard to just transition and take these policies forward more.
Thank you for that. So you see the Just Transition Commission then being a permanent feature?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, under the Act, it's required that there's no end date to the Just Transition. It will continue on for the life of the.
And there'll also be the NI Climate Commissioner as well that is to be established, which will have an oversight role for the entire Act. So that there's two new bodies that will be there in terms of providing some oversight and advice to departments on particular elements.
Okay.
Can I say, just in terms of the coordination, there's really, really good cross-governmental structures. I know this is kind of boring administrative stuff, but there's really good cross-governmental structures where all departments are working really well together. It's really impressive in how closely the departments are working together on this and on the development of climate action plans at all levels, right through the civil service.
Probably hear more about that then too. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, Chair.
Thank you, Patsy. Just before I bring Michelle in and then Anya, I'm really interested in this piece, Patsy, because it's something that I'd written down. I think it's really important because the tables will point to those who will bear quite a lot of the burden in terms of reaching our targets. But when we make laws and we decide we're going to tell people what to do, we have to have that validity and testimony that actually our departments are ambitious and are leading the way in this regard. So you've pointed to the Just Transition Committee that will have a role to play. And the Climate Commissioner, but in reality, and this goes back to the piece, I'm not quite sure about this, what does interdepartmental working look like going forward? Because I don't think it'll certainly not happen in a vacuum. And what does that connectedness look like in terms of delivery and setting the example? Because I think the public sector is going to have to set the example. If we're going to hold people to account in private, in industry and in farming, we cannot be dropping the ball. And the example I'll give, and I don't mean to do this in a disrespectful way because it's underfunded an issue, but NI Water, for instance, at the moment is significantly behind in this regard. So how do we do that in the interdepartmental space, not just being held to account, but actually the operational aspect of that?
I think you're absolutely right. The public sector has to lead by example. What we can see is, I know we brought forward public body reporting regulations earlier last year, and public bodies have really stepped up. They're showcasing the really good work they're doing, but also so business has stepped up, so departments have to lead the way, I think. I mean, in terms of what interdepartmental working looks like, we have a strategic oversight group that has membership from every department. It's chaired by the Permanent Secretary of DAERA. They meet regularly, they report on progress regularly. They're attended regularly, always by the senior person. Underneath that, we've got a sectoral leads working group, which are the people developing the policies. And then below that, there are now climate change teams, I think, in almost every department working on this. And it is, I'm in the civil service 25 years. It's like, it is really, really good cross-governmental working, because we know that is, you have to work in that way to achieve this.
Yeah. Even last year, during the consultation period on the carbon budgets, it was very much a sort of, a collaborative process. So there were some events that DARE led on, but a lot of events were joined up with other departments because we wanted to present that. And I imagine that when it comes to going out to consult on the Climate Action Plan, you'll see more evidence of that. It won't be departments working on their own and talking about their own areas, because that's not going to work in terms of the wider piece that we have to deliver.
Okay, thank you, because it probably is the single most, apart from health, the most cross-cutting issue that's in the purview. Okay, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. In order to achieve these targets, we will require a huge amount of investment, and it's money that the executive doesn't have. And on a weekly basis, we're hearing from various departments about the need for increased budgets. We're looking for ring-fence budgets, even within within DARE. So I am concerned about the burden of cost, and it really, I suppose, doesn't make me feel any better whenever I read, oh well, this isn't just going to be borne by the public sector. The private sector will also be the public sector will be the private sector as well. So it's across Northern Ireland PLC burden. I do think it's probably a little bit disingenuous for us to say, well, there'll be more money in people's pockets if we convert to heat pumps, whenever in fact, if there's a burden across society, well then that will also be borne by the consumer. So that worries me, that we're agreeing to things essentially blindly at this point in time. We have targets that aren't necessarily costed. We don't have plans in place that are set against those. So I really just want to have a conversation just around cost and where that burden will actually lie.
Yeah. So I suppose we've done quite a detailed RIA in terms of what we estimate the costs, but I suppose the reality is, that the 2040 one is a 26-year period, so we don't know, in 15 years what policies and proposals we'll be developing and to cost those. So that is where we're relying on the Climate Action Plan development process, because those are the policies and proposals, and they will be costed because they're required to be by the Climate Action Plan. And I suppose that the carbon budgets, what they're setting is the trajectory, they're setting the ambition and the pathway. But the actual detail of what we'll be doing and what those costs could be to government or to the private sector will be in the Climate Action Plan. I suppose, one of the ways to look at it is, many of these interventions would be considered investments. And I suppose one of the things it's worth saying as well is there is quite a lot of things that are already happening across government that are in the baseline. If you think of what we're looking at in terms of like energy efficiency, there's quite a lot of money already spent on energy efficiency across several departments, and there's quite a lot of money lost out of the health budget in terms of having to deal with health impacts for people having poor houses and cold houses and damp and wet houses. So it's kind of thinking, how can we better use that money in a way that provides a longer term solution to reduce people's bills and also kind of have a potential impact on the health budget. I know the Lancet produced a paper last month about the health benefits of taking climate action, and that is one of the things they talked about better quality housing, and we know better quality housing helps us with better educational outcomes. In terms of impact on consumers, I think that's really where our just transition elements come in and the requirements in the Act, that we need to make sure that those people that have contributed least aren't impacted the most. But everything, the reality is everything, you're not signing up to something that you don't know about. All of this will come through departments, through ministers, through the executive, through the assembly. It all has to go through the correct process before all of those policies can be implemented. So we will know, and they will be dealt with through the normal cost budget and process that government has.
I think it's probably important to emphasise again, Jane did say this in opening remarks, but we already have targets in place, so we already have to meet the 2030 target. So if we didn't set carbon budgets, we would still have to bring forward the actions to meet the 2030 target. So the carbon budget doesn't change that to any significant extent, because we still need to deliver the trajectory towards the targets. what they do is give us a focus over the shorter period in terms of how we can do it and be on that trajectory. But we already need to, under the law, to bring forward the actions and start delivering actions that are going to get us towards those targets, because we have to meet them.
And the solution to that, and you've referenced obviously the legal challenges would actually be, and I'm on record of asking the Minister this, about actually looking at those targets again and bringing forward amending legislation, perhaps to look at something which is much more realistic and achievable. But look, this is a much broader conversation, Chair, and happy to return to it again. The other thing I suppose I do want to ask is with regards to the changing position in Scotland and what that actually means realistically.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important, Scotland, as you know, have changed their 2030 target. It's probably worth clarifying. Their 2030 target was the same as our proposed 2040 target. Like, it was an incredibly ambitious pathway, and they had requirements to produce climate action plans on an annual basis. So what they're now proposing to do is to move to 5-yearly carbon budget process, which is what we are looking at, to provide that kind of I suppose that's your staged, managed approach to what they're doing. And it's important to say as well, they have publicly and politically, they have said they're going to retain their 2045 net zero target. So they still have a target that is the highest ambition target across these islands. They have no intention of changing that, but they have changed their intention with the primary legislation at the moment going through their process is to change their 2030 target. But it was incredibly ambitious. But I mean, we do have figures on the targets across all of the regions, and they're largely comparable. I would say Northern Ireland are slightly less than most other regions.
And I think in Scotland, what they had annual greenhouse gas targets, and I mean, we had looked at annual greenhouse gas targets whenever we were bringing the bill through, and we recognised there's particular challenges, even from an administrative perspective, around that. And we thought the carbon budget approach was the better approach, and that's what Scotland's moving to, and that's what's done in the rest of the UK, essentially, at a UK level. It's done in Wales, it's done in the south of Ireland. So, as well as the 2030 target, I suppose the big thing for Scotland is trying to have a better system in place, rather than having their annual targets. But their overall ambition in terms of net zero hasn't changed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm going to bring Anya. You're online, so thank you, Anya.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Jane, you referenced, well, not some of the costs in your opening brief. Now, in terms of the fact that this is obviously cross-departmental as well as cross-cutting between public and private sector, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here and maybe ask a question that you don't have the answer to. However, have you any ballpoint figure at all as to what those possible costings to the public sector in particular would be?
I suppose that the simple answer in terms of that is no, not yet, but you'll get a better indication of that whenever the first climate action plan comes forward, because it's going to set out what individual departments are doing at a sectoral level in terms of the policies and proposals, and then there'll be associated costs and financial information around that. So that's where you'll get a more robust and thorough understanding of the actual cost of the public purse, and hopefully in that as well you'll get a better understanding of the additionality costs. So, as Jane alluded to in a previous answer, a lot of the things that might be taken forward in that climate action plan are things that are being driven by other things. So we already had our energy strategy in place, and we already had significant policies in transport. So there were things already happening that will probably be captured within the climate action plan. But going back to your question in terms of the cost, it's really through that climate action plan process that you'll get a better understanding of the cost of the public purse.
And the CCC have stated that costs can be delivered largely by the private sector, and they have also stated some costs will be paid at UK level and will be socialised across the UK. I know that doesn't give you an exact figure, but as Anthony said, it will be in those policies and proposals that are taken forward as part of the Climate Action Plan.
No, thank you folks for answering that. And okay, I get that there's a lot of moving parts around this at the minute. And just quickly a second question, Chair. In relation to the Climate Commissioner and the Just Transition Committee themselves, going forward to 2028 to 2033 and that carbon budget, would both of those bodies have the ability, or I suppose the power, to review that set carbon budget?
Yes, they will. We hope they have the Northern Ireland Climate Commissioner doesn't actually sit with DAERA, that would sit with TEO, so I wouldn't like to tramp on their toes. But in relation to the Just Transition Commission, As you may know, we gave briefing to the committee a few weeks ago that we're out for consultation at the moment. And that consultation will form the views of the regulations, and once the regulations are in place, we will start to recruit members to the Commission. And my view would be is not only could they look at the carbon budget 2, as you referred to, the 28 to 33, but also be retrospectively be able to review the carbon budget 1, the 23 to 27 one as well.
But I suppose just to add some clarity to that, so in terms of what they'll look at probably the climate action plans associated with those carbon budgets and determine whether or not they're fit for purpose in the context of what the requirements are in the Act. They won't be able to, and they've no role under the Act in terms of looking at the actual figures that are set for the carbon budgets, because once they're set, we can't go back and change them until there's some caveats around that. But once they're set in terms of this first carbon budget, we wouldn't be able to change it. Their role is more about how we're going to deliver the overall targets on the carbon budgets. It's very much about what our department's proposing to do. In terms of the actual targets and carbon budgets, that role in terms of the advice around that sits more with the Climate Change Committee.
No, thank you. Look, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. It's an incredible. The detail in the paper that we've been furnished with is mind-boggling. I'm just reading a piece here about the impact of climate affecting parts of the UK and Northern Ireland may not be seen as significant. However, there's potential catastrophic disruption due to the global inactivity and changes maybe not being affected in other places in the world. So this is something I'm sure is going to generate a lot of debate in the chamber. I look forward to engaging with you guys in the future. And well, thank you for your time. If there are no other points to be made, guys, members? No. Okay. Thank you for your time. Thank you, guys. Okay, members. We've now heard from the witnesses in regard to the 2 SRs. They have received executive approval and will be debated in the chamber. So in regard to that and in regard to the committee's response to that debate, I want to make sure I pick up the tone of what you guys have to offer in that. So if anybody has any points to make at this stage, please do. And if not, certainly you can feed them through to the clerk in advance of the debate to ensure that you're not reasonably well reflected, that your views have been well captured by the team and are reflected in the committee response. Obviously, I'll be able to make my points at the end of that piece, but as a chair, I want to make sure that it's captured any priorities or issues that you have.
Well, I do have concerns, and I'll continue to have concerns in relation to that, and obviously I'm not supportive of it. So.
Okay.
I've been seeing places that
range of views.
There is
range of views.
It's both for climate change.
Is it both? Sorry, there were two.
It comes as a bulk buy, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
we're in 2025 in a few weeks' time. We've only 5 years to meet those targets, and I think it's all now impossible at this stage. But you have to try, I suppose.
Sure, I would say respectfully that maybe in 2025, but sometimes this feels a bit like a parallel universe. This is a bill that was passed by the entire Assembly, brought forward by a previous minister. Without getting into the politics, I mean, everybody knows the political allegiances and the politics there, at least those that existed at that time. But I'm content if the committee is not objecting to this. Obviously content that the range of views are considered, but from my own point of view, I have to make it absolutely clear that I see no point in making this legislation if we're not going to proceed with it, especially when we've just had outlined to us the position of other places that are making more progress, better progress and quicker progress. And I'm having this conversation and consideration in the backdrop of having had a decision made earlier to do less about our natural environment that won't be already doing. I'll deal with that separately at a later stage. But on this one, as long as we're not objecting, views being reflected, absolutely 100%. But there are a range of views, some are more positive than others.
I think so. I think I wouldn't be content in suggesting that the committee had taken a position. My starting point is that we're already at a low number. And if we, our percentage in terms of what we've achieved isn't good, and we do have to make changes. That's the reality. But I do think that they've offered up that through the just transition and stuff, we've got to be kind of showing some ambition. So, if you're reminded, I'll just say the range of, and you'll get a chance to speak in the debate, guys, and I'll have a point. And okay. Content, Clerk? Sorry.
Just want to put on record my support for the regulations going forward, and I agree with John there, absolutely. All views should be represented and come through the committee, absolutely, but I certainly am supportive of it, and for the reasons you outlined as well, and that the officials told us there about how we don't want to be lagging behind any further, and to give our businesses that some certainty as well, and actually know how to move forward with these budgets. So
I think we need to, it's just a kind of, there's a reframing that needs to happen. I think it's really important, and I will make this point on my own, not through the committee chair, but that as departments we need to lead the way in this. There is a burden that needs to be shared out. However, we need to not be letting people down as the government through the departments and stuff. So and shouldering this fairly. But as someone who's proud of Northern Ireland, I'm not content that we're bottom of the league. To be honest, just not. And that's not to cast any aspersions on anybody. We are where we are, and we need to get better, I think. So, okay, members, thank you very much. We have a lot of stuff to read through, so if you can pin your ears back. Okay, agenda item 11, departmental written briefing consultation on the management measures for the use of fast craft and fast speakers and personal watercraft in the marine protected areas synopsis report. Refer you to the following papers in the pack. Clerk's memo dated 25th of November, pages 264 to 265, and the departmental written briefing dated 11th of November. Consultation on management measures for the use of fast craft and personal watercraft in marine protected areas synopsis report at 265 to 299. DAERA has written a synopsis report based on the responses it received to the above consultation and is now in a position to publish this report. Members, I refer you to the Clerk's memo, pages 264 to 265 for a summary. And for the record, I will highlight some main points. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a marked increase in water-based recreational activity, resulting in a rise in the reports of marine wildlife disturbance, predominantly attributed to the inappropriate use of personal watercraft (PWC). In response, DAERA engaged with relevant bodies and developed proposed management measures. DAERA intends to develop and issue advisory notices to inform PWC users of the ways in which the activity may cause disturbance to protected marine species and advice on best practice. It will carry out monitoring to see whether further measures are required to protect vulnerable species, and it's considering the practical steps involved in its permit-based access system for commercial tour providers. Have you any comments, or are you content to note this? Content to note. Thank you. Agenda item 12, departmental written briefing update and free trade agreements. I refer to the following papers in the pack. Clerk's memo dated 25th November, pages 300 to 301, and the departmental written briefing dated 6th November, update on free trade at pages 303 to 305. I refer you to the Clerk's memo for a summary, and for the record, I will highlight some main points. This is an update on the FTAs, particularly in relation to the agri-food sector. The UK negotiated continuity agreements with almost all 70 countries that the EU has FTAs with. The next steps the UK government will be taking are to take forward the Labour Party manifesto commitment to secure a veterinary, sanitary and phytosanitary SPS agreement with the EU. DAERA officials will continue to engage with the UK government officials in relation to further negotiations of FTAs with the Gulf Cooperation Council, Switzerland, South Korea and other countries where negotiations may resume in the future. DAERA continues to encourage DEFRA to push for an ambitious text on SPS, including animal welfare and antimicrobial resistance. Any comments to make on that? I have heard that they're talking about 10 years to secure and deliver the SPS, which I don't think is in any way ambitious. Agenda item 13, departmental written briefing, update and access to labour. Members are referred to the following papers in the pack. Clerk's memo dated 25th November at pages 307, 308. And that is a departmental written briefing dated the 6th November, update and access to labour at pages 309 to 316. Members, I refer you to the written briefing dated the 6th of November regarding the update on access to labour, particularly in relation to agri-food sector, and to the Clerk's summary memo in your packet 307 to 308. We have discussed these issues on many occasions and are aware that many businesses continue to rely on migrant workers to address their labour needs, in particular, as was the case this week, the fishing and then the meat processing and mushroom harvesting sectors. We are also aware that the Minister is trying to address the unsuitability of the work visa routes available to these sectors, and we considered correspondence from the Minister at our meeting on the 14th of November, in which he highlighted that the DEFRA Secretary of State had rejected the advanced policy changes. He had proposed to improve visa routes for such workers in Northern Ireland. DAERA officials will work in collaboration with DFA officials to develop an immigration policy position for the Executive to consider. The ERA Committee has supported the Minister in these matters and it remains on the agenda, and we're seeking a virtual meeting with the Migration Advisory Committee Chair in the new year. Any comments to make on that, members? No? Okay, agenda item 14, correspondence. Members, I refer you to correspondence dated 19th of November in the pack at pages 318 to 571 regarding the Office for Environmental Protection's Bathing Water Report. The report has highlighted that the regulatory regime is being followed in places, but it needs to be updated to better protect swimmers and users of our lakes and rivers. There are 11 recommendations to DAERA in the report. Members, we plan to bring OEP in the committee to the committee in the new year to discuss their recently published reports, including this one. Are you content to note? I have one point to make in that, guys. We have huge numbers of people who are doing the daily dip in waters right across rivers, reservoirs, lakes and sea, and I'm not sure what they're dipping in. So I think there's a public health issue here that will maybe manifest in years to come, so I think it's something we need to give a bit of priority to. Members, I refer you to correspondence dated the 19th of November in the packet, pages 572 to 573. It's an invitation to the annual festival drinks reception on Tuesday 10th of December in the Belfast Harbour. Link to the invite if you want to attend. Please respond individually to the invitation. Members, I refer you to correspondence dated 22nd of November in the packet, pages 574 to 575 from the clerk to the Committee for Finance regarding Northern Ireland Banking and Financial Services Landscape Inquiry. At its meeting on the 21st of November, the Finance Committee members agreed that the clerk should write to the other statutory committees to inform them of the inquiry and ask whether they have any information or views that they wish to form part of the evidence gathered through the inquiry. In the correspondence is the terms of reference for the inquiry. Members, have you any comments to make, or do you want us to make as a committee, or would you prefer to leave this matter to individuals and to party responses? Yep, individuals and party responses. Thank you. I refer you to the 27th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules dated 22nd November, pages 576 to 583. There are no DAERA SRs referenced in this report. Are you content to note? Thank you. I refer you to correspondence from the Investment Strategy ISNI Delivery Tracking System and Investing Activity Report, pages 584 to 587 of the pack. This report is a summary of the projects and investing activities which have been entered on the DTS by NICS departments and their agencies. Content to note?
Chair, just on that, on an observation, particularly given the focus that there's been on the Royal Maternity this week, maybe there's some oblique reason for this, but I'm looking at a number of the procurement projects, and they're relatively small, 2 to 4 million quid, and their construction start is 2019, and their construction end is 2030, and another one, construction start is 2022, construction end 2032. Is this one man in a wheelbarrow or something? Honestly, could we maybe just get more detail from the department around these projects, because that's an exorbitant amount of time to take to deliver a relatively small projects. If that is, I'm reading it as is presented to us there.
It is. I agree. I've read through the report a number of times, and I'm not sure if the projects have been implemented, whether they've started, whether it's the agreed contract, and then obviously that might be the case, and they might not be started. But you're absolutely.
The procurement has ended.
Yeah.
Indeed, one of them, construction, according to this, has started in 2019.
Started, yeah.
That's just.
Well, yeah. Do you think of the labour and construction costs that escalate on it every year extorsively? I mean, that's why it could be one of those procurement failures.
11 years to deliver a project between 2 and 4 million.
They run so over budget. Almost every time.
That stands right out of the page.
And just as a clerk, have you got enough on that to?
Yeah, we'll go back and see who can.
Thank you.
Where's the right? Work with the Dallow to see who's the right people to.
Thank you.
About that.
Thank you, Patsy.
Thanks, Chair.
No bother. Okay. Agenda item 15 is the forward work programme. I refer you to pages 97 to 99 table papers regarding the forward work programme, which is now planned to our first meeting back after the Christmas recess. Members, our last meeting prior to Christmas recess is Thursday the 12th of December. Okay, the proposed first meeting could be the 9th of January, however, that's not set in stone, and many committees, including Finance, Justice, and there's quite a few that I'm now aware of, are meeting the week after that, which is the week after the Business Committee meet. We would have I'm in your hands, but we would have a better idea of what is on plenary for the week after. So if you're content, our first meeting could be the 16th of January. You're content, it'll also allow staff to take leave because they're accumulating leave at a rapid rate and don't get a chance to use it, and they can lose it. So if anything changes, guys, we know we can be called back and the chamber can be still. Okay. Members, you'll note that at next week's meeting, the 5th of December, we have a briefing from the UFU, the Ulster Farmers Union, and the National Sheep Industry regarding MV and the impact of sheep industry, and also on a wider matter of the issues the FU wished to highlight, and they will be highlighting to the committee. Next week, we will also be starting to consider the remaining common frameworks that were not being considered by the ERA committee in the previous mandate, beginning with the common framework and the UK emissions trading scheme. Members.
Sorry, Chair, to be fair, sorry, could I just say I haven't worded that very well. It's not that they weren't looked at by the previous ERA committee, but some of them weren't finalised at that time and they prioritised the number that they looked at. So I haven't worded that very well. It's just there are 6 remaining ones for this committee to take a look at. And we'll get briefings on all of them in due course to see if there are any outstanding issues of concern.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a compressed time frame, so I think it's useful that we start to address those. Okay. Members, are there any other items of business? Okay. The date and time and place for next meeting is Thursday the 5th of December here in Parliament Buildings at 10 a.m. I'll now close the committee.
Committee Room 21. Sound.